Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Kevin Orford, Chair of NHS Devon. Welcome to the July 2025 meeting of the Board of NHS Devon, the Devon Integrated Care Board. This is a meeting held in public, which is streaming live to our YouTube channel. We have apologies for absence from Donna Manson, from Kate Shields and from John Finn. Joining us today also we have Councillor Mary Aspinall, Chair of the One Devon Integrated Care Partnership. We have Mark Cook, the Managing Director, Strategy Oversight and Regulation for NHS England South West. And we have Alison Williams, the System Recovery Director from NHS England. We welcome also those members of the public who are viewing the meeting online and those who are in the room with us here in Exeter today. We understand that Steve Darling MP will be joining us later this morning with a particular interest in the items on children and young people and the cardiothoracic paper. And we will try and schedule those two items when Steve arrives, and so if there's any difference to the timings that we're expecting, then we will move those items around the agenda accordingly. Following this meeting of the board in public today, there will be a meeting in private to consider progress relating to the design of the role and purpose of the ICBs and the clustering arrangement, which is covered in my chair's report and in Steve's chief executive report this morning. And we will also be looking at an initial report on the progress against the NOF4 exit criteria for Devon, and that report, once finalised, will come to a public meeting of the board in the autumn. So please note, everybody, that the timings have been revised and that we aim to conclude the meeting by 1:30 instead of 2:30 as was originally scheduled. Board members will have received an updated agenda last night, and a printed copy has been tabled for you this morning. So before we start, Philippa, can I confirm that the meeting is quorate?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Thank you. So let's move on to the agenda. At 1.2, we have declarations of interest. Is there anything which anyone wants to add to the declarations, or anything which we need to draw to the attention of the board relating to today's agenda? If not, then we will note the register of interests. Moving on to 1.3, we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of May 2025. I'm not going to go through them page by page, but are there any points of accuracy which board members would like to highlight? Okay, if not, then the board approves the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of May 2025. Item 1.4 is the action register. So first of all, we have a recommendation for closure against action ICB 24111. This relates to a board request to review progress on the children's and young people's service recovery, and this is included on the agenda today at item 4.5. So is the board happy to close that action? Thank you. There is also a recommendation for closure against action ICB 25006. This relates to a board request that the One Devon Collaborative Corporate Services business case be reviewed by the Finance and Performance Committee. This was reviewed at the June meeting of the committee and is referenced in the report of the chair of the F&P committee, which is included at item 5.5 of today's agenda. Is everybody happy for us to close that action? There are then 4 actions which are in progress relating to board requests for discussions at future board development sessions. These are actions ICB 25008 and 009, 0091 and 0092. These relate to the decommissioning schedule, population health management, changes to the NHS oversight framework and development of a commissioning plan. And it's noted that the board will receive an update on this at the September meeting once the arrangements for the Cornwall, Isles of Scilly and Devon ICB cluster are finalised. And then finally, there's action ICB 25015, which relates to the mental health assertive and intensive outreach action plan, to which there was an action for the CMO to discuss the metrics in the plan with non-executive member Salma Ali. Can I just ask Peter whether that action is now complete?
It is, thank you, Chair. We caught up yesterday, and the metrics will be included into future updates to the board.
Thank you, Peter. So let's move on to item 1.5, which is a report from Chief Executive Officer Steve Moore relating to the 10-year health plan for England, named Fit for the Future. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And in the spirit of being brief with these things, the board would have seen some of this in our various development sessions, but I think it's really helpful now to put into the public domain the summary of all of the feedback that we've received locally and added indeed to the national feedback pool around the development of the 10-year plan. Only a couple of things to say. I think firstly I'd want to record, I guess, all of our gratitude to the public for the responses we've received. I think it's been a remarkable set of responses, and indeed from those the insights that they've been able to provide. Much of that, as the board will probably recognise, echoes and builds on things that we have heard before in other ways. I would also call out the really great work of our comms and engagement team, who not only ran all of these processes with other staff involved, but also was able to capture all of that data locally, because that's now forming a really important part of the basis of the work we're doing around developing the strategy for Devon, which you know is due to come back to board in September. I think one of the things that I just want to pull out of it is you can see all the areas, but it's great to hear the things that people think are positive in the NHS. You can hear the areas which are of no surprise around how people feeling how they're waiting too long for many types of care. But actually there's also a really strong signal threading through this about what the public would like to see, what good would look like, and how our neighbourhood teams might be the way in which we can really deliver that. So, for example, things like better coordination, because there's a sense of of not having joined-up care. That's something which we can build in so that we really build these neighbourhoods around what individuals need. Access to primary care, better access to prevention and diagnostics, again, should be and will be part of our ambition. And also patient wanting to be empowered with information to take control of their own health. So all of that we intend to build into our strategy and are starting to build that into our strategy, because we've got a huge ambition around making integrated neighbourhood health a real feature for Devon, and indeed learning from our colleagues down in Cornwall. Chair, that's all I'll say, but I'm happy to take any comments.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Steve on that item? Sam?
Thanks, Chair. It's great just to see that feedback captured, isn't it, and get a summary of where people locally are coming from. I think it's also important to just reflect a little bit on what the 10-year plan also said in terms of some of those themes, which are going to give us big challenges. I think coming out of the period, none of the current acute hospitals are going to be the same as they are going into the period. So just to give you a sense of that, currently 80% of our patient contacts are outpatients, and the 10-year plan talks about moving 2/3 of those to the community or to digital. So that just gives you a sense of the change that we now need to embrace and work out how do we deliver, don't we?
Thanks, Sam. Really important point. Any other observations or questions for Steve on the 10-year plan? Okay, thank you. In that case, the actions here are to note the 10-year plan for England, Fit for the Future. Note also the key findings from the Devon 10-year plan engagement programme, and let's record in the minutes our thanks to the comms and engagement team at the ICB, and to all of the members of the public who engaged in that exercise, which fed into the 10-year plan. And we're also asked to take satisfactory assurance from the proposed approach to using the findings to inform local priorities and programmes of work. Is everyone happy to take that assurance? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to my report, the Chair's report, which I'll take as read, but I just want to draw the Board's attention to the report, which focuses this month on the clustering of the Devon ICB board with that of the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB board, which has now been approved by NHS England. So this clustering is part of a national move to reduce the cost of integrated care boards, and nationally the 42 ICB boards will become 26 cluster boards. These aren't mergers, although formal mergers are possible, and they may take place between April 2026 and April 2027 following due process. What I do want to say is we are working really well with colleagues in Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB to ensure that the clustering process runs really smoothly, and that the focus of both ICBs remains firmly on the health and well-being of our populations, and that focus is maintained once the cluster board is formed. So that cluster proposal will require that the Devon ICB board formally delegates authority to a new Peninsula Cluster Board, and in due course we will set an extraordinary meeting of the board in public to agree this. And linked to that, I'm also asking the board to note an NHS England mandated amendment to the Devon ICB constitution, and what this is to enable the ICB Chief Executive Officer to be the Chief Executive of more than one ICB, and that's being put in place to facilitate the establishment of a cluster ICB with one Chief Executive Officer. So that's not for approval because it is a mandated requirement, but I'd just like the board to note it. So are there any questions relating to my chair's report? Okay, if not, we will note the content of the Chair's report, and we can move on to item 2.2, which is the Chief Executive's report. So I'll invite Steve to present his report. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I won't go through all of the issues in my report, given the need to get on with the other substantive items on the agenda. But there were a couple of things I wanted to highlight. The first is to build on the Chair's comments around the clustering arrangements. I think we're all very conscious of the impact this is having on staff, particularly with the ongoing uncertainty and, to an extent, issues which are not entirely in our control, meaning that timescales are perhaps longer than we would have anticipated previously. As an ICB, and we had an opportunity to meet all our staff again earlier this week, at the same time as Cornwall met with their staff, reiterating both the formal support we have available for people, both in planning for the future, but also in emotional and wellbeing support, and also a message out to all of our senior leaders, all line managers, about ensuring that we are keeping in contact with each other and looking out for each other during a really difficult time. There's a part further on my report that I just wanted to connect to that, which I think is important. It's great to see, I'm delighted to see the progress we're making on the pulse survey development, because I think now more than ever, the importance of keeping in contact and understanding the feedback from our staff, really important. So we're going through that process. We are being absolutely open and transparent with staff, including telling them when we don't know what's going to happen, because I think that is, if not as useful, it is helpful to know what is fact and what we're still trying to deal with. And I am blown away every day, actually, by people's commitment to getting on with the day job, despite personal and professional uncertainty in the organisation. I won't go onto the details of the PPCI stuff because we have a paper on the agenda, but suffice to say, I think it's important to take from that, and we'll have a more in-depth discussion, is that this paper does not revisit the PPCI proposal itself. This is about how we approach it differently, given where we were a month or so ago. And finally, before happy to take any questions with your permission, Chair, because we're just coming out of the other side of the industrial action, which finished yesterday with our resident doctors, our CMO has been our overseer and coordinator of that across Devon. And whilst I think the data is still coming in, I thought it might be helpful to give you a very brief verbal update on how the system managed during that 5-day period. So if you're happy, Chair, I'll hand over to the CMO.
Thanks, and thanks, Steve. So, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of all our staff, both in the ICB and the providers, of maintaining safe services for our population over the past 5 days. As Steve has said, We are starting to understand the data in terms of impact and the risk of ongoing industrial action to our ambitions to improve access and constitutional targets. What we do know so far is that activity that was stood down during industrial action was less than in previous rounds of industrial action in line with national approaches. We have no more information at this current time about exact numbers, but we'll bring that to board as and when we have it.
Thank you, Peter. And no, you have to step out of the meeting at 10:30 today to join a meeting about the industrial action, national meeting on the industrial action. So thank you for doing that. Are there any questions for Steve or for Peter? Frank.
Thank you, Chair. My conflict of interests on this is already declared, but just for clarity, I will say it in the room. I have 5 adopted children, aged 23 to 33. So it's about the Care Leavers Covenant, which I think we have interpreted as those leaving care at that age rather than the whole care experience group. And my request would be that could we possibly look in the Quality Committee at whether anyone who has been in care should be in that group of the covenant. It was brought home to me this week when an 18-year-old was and his parents were in front of me in my surgery, and he is adopted. There have been issues for quite some time. The parents are trying to get help, and I do not believe he is getting the support that he would normally get if he was part of this covenant. Because he's 18, he's been dealt with as an adult who's making independent adult decisions without thinking about the trauma of the background. So I think anyone who has been in care has gone into care because of significant traumas, and if we have a covenant, it shouldn't be just those leaving care at 18, it should be the whole group, would be my suggestion, but clearly there's lots of implications and it needs to be looked at properly.
Steve, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Frank. Getting a sense of the implications and the scale of that, I think we need to look at. But I think the spirit is absolutely there. I think it is great that we have the covenant and we're able to make some real difference to people's lives. But we need to look at ensuring that the spirit of it is followed, not just the definitions of things. So we will take that offline and give some consideration to how we might be able to define that wider cohort so we can support as many people as possible. But I'm pleased to see the progress that's been made and the difference it's already making to some children, young people coming out of care. So we will absolutely look at that, Frank, and see what we can do. I think a really good point.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Steve. And Phil, please.
Yeah, Steve, it was really good to see in your report acknowledgement of the Brook, which is the new learning disability and autism unit that is literally just opened down in Dawlish, and that's going to make a fantastic difference to people who need support who have otherwise had that outside of the Devon boundaries. So whilst it's a sub-regional unit, it will definitely benefit the population of Devon, because that was a particular need for us to have that facility, and is a sort of massive collaboration across many different organisations and across sector as well. So it's just really good to see that celebratory bit in there.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Steve. Graham.
Thanks. Both in your report and in the 10-year plan, it references Health Watch, and I think we all know that its future is uncertain. How viable is it to work with Health Watch in your plans?
Yeah, another good question. Thanks, Graham. So there's probably a couple of elements to that. So the first is absolutely, whilst Health Watch remains on the pitch with us, which may be for some time, working really closely with them, and our comms team, actually, as you know, has a really good relationship, and they've done some really valuable work for us. I think the second point is in designing the new cluster arrangements and our role and purpose and capabilities, we are giving really careful consideration to how we ensure we still get feedback from the people who experience our services in a world where Health Watch won't in the long term exist. So we don't quite have an answer to that yet, but unless we have that feeding into our strategy, we're missing a really important point around the table. So it's absolutely been acknowledged, and we're working on it.
Any further questions relating to the Chief Executive's report? Okay, thank you, Steve, and the board notes the content of the Chief Executive's report. On to section 3 of the agenda, which is the section for approval and endorsement, and item 3.1 is an update on the 25-26 annual plan, and I'm going to invite Libby Ryan-Davis to take us into this item. Thanks, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the paper as read, but just to set out a few key messages for board members today. So the paper presents to the board the consolidated annual plan objectives. The work has been done in response to a number of significant developments in year, which board members will be aware of, including the publication of the model ICB blueprint. So the original 17 annual plan objectives that were approved by the board earlier in the year have now been reviewed against the organisational priorities and have been consolidated into 6 cross-cutting objectives that are set out in the paper, and these are aligned to the 10-year plan also. Each of these 6 objectives, similar to the previous 17, are underpinned by high-level delivery and enabling plans that set out more of the detail behind this. There's been quite a significant piece of work done to make sure that in reviewing the 17 through to the revised 6, that nothing has been lost and has been hooked into the 6 cross-cutting objectives. The paper also sets out a proposed deprioritisation process, because I think we're all very aware that there's a need to focus our efforts and resources on our key priorities given the current context. And what that will do is provide the ICB with a framework to manage activity that no longer aligns to the core priorities of the business. The approach taken to review the objectives, you'll see within the paper, has aimed to balance both the in-year delivery with the longer-term strategic transformation and the work on the strategy. And just to assure the board that we will continue to monitor through a robust process the delivery of these revised objectives, and also review the plan throughout the year in response to any other significant changes. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Libby. Any questions, observations for Libby Kay, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Libby, for that. I'm linking this to our other papers, which describes the scale of the financial challenge, which, of course, we knew was significant when we put our plan in place. And what I'd like to understand is something about which of these really great actions might we push at a greater pace or pursue even further to help us meet our challenging 25-26 financial plan.
So Kirsty may want to come in as well on this. I think just going back to what I said about, in reviewing the annual plan, we've been really key to consider the balance between the focus of our efforts on in-year and the focus on the longer term. And so aligning that to our delivery management arrangements, a new consideration about strengthening our contract management arrangements as well, and linked to the commissioning plan and a new commissioning hub arrangements. So that is very much the focus within the in-year, aligned to the other paper that's on the agenda today, which is around the delivery management. I'm not sure, Kirsty, whether there's anything that you would want to add to that.
No, I think you've covered it, Libby. So they are embedded in Objective 5 and 6, and the new performance management framework is very much focused on in-year delivery. So that hasn't been lost in this.
So I'll bring in Steve first and then Graham. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, there is this, in the way that we constructed it this year, as the board will be aware, this difference between the operational plan and the annual plan. There are a lot of things that we've tried to ensure that are properly reflected in that. I think maybe the heart of your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is this laying the groundwork for the things that are actually going to push us beyond what we've already signed up to. In other words, get us into a better position, particularly the development of the strategic. The strategy and the strategic commissioning intentions are going to be really key to that, because that will set out what it is that we need to start working on this year to start much more transformational work next year, given, as you'll be aware, this year's very challenging SIP target was, whilst there was some transformation in there, was, should we say, slightly more traditional. And actually, we're running out of the road to be able to do that traditional SIP work. So this is very much about focusing on those things that we absolutely have to do now in order to be in a better position for next year to be able to make bigger change faster. What I would hope for next year is that we simply have one plan that describes all the various elements, the in-year stuff, and the ongoing building of a strategic intent about how we're going to move the system towards the 3 DARSI shifts.
Thanks, Steve. So I've got Graham next, and then Loper and Frank.
Yep. So since we've seen a version of this document before, I'm repeating my comments that also applied to that previous version, because I'm still questioning this. Just consolidating a number of objectives into few objectives does not in itself change the workload, because the buckets become bigger. And therefore, what's being stopped becomes really important. And the point I have made in the past, I'm really interested in Phil and Sam's points on this, is if it's a matter of shunting some of the responsibilities, or at least the workload, to providers, is that adequately provided for in this document? There's reference to it, but I'm still not clear whether there's some formality around that, because I don't think the providers are sitting there idle with time on their hands to take on additional work. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Libby, do you want to respond to that, and then perhaps we'll bring Sam in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Graham. I think what we've tried to do by defining a reprioritisation process is to have a framework by which we can have a mechanism to work through and have those really robust discussions and challenges around where how we manage the workload, but also how we have those discussions not only in the ICB, because this is obviously our annual plan, but across the system. I think with any new process that we put in place, as we've seen with the delivery management process, we need to adapt that in response to feedback. So we will continue to do that, but that mechanism should enable us to have that framework, to have those really robust conversations.
And Sam, from a provider perspective?
Yeah, just to give you some reassurance, Graham, we're working very closely with Libby and her team, okay. And I think what's been helpful is actually to get that clarity on who's leading on what. Okay. And so the work streams that are provider-led, the providers are really clear, they've got to lead them and deliver them. You're absolutely right, there is limited capacity in providers, so we're going to have to keep going through the year, evaluating what drops off the list and where we do allocate our resources, but step one, clarity is really helpful.
Good.
And Steve, please.
Sorry, just to add to all of that, and all of this is overseen by the system leadership group, so that we ensure that even though they're being done in different places, we've got one single view of everything that's going on, and where there are capacity issues, and some of those were raised at a previous meeting. Whether they're provider or ICB, we talk about them and we address the issue so that we can keep working on those priorities. So it's quite a dynamic situation, not least because of the changing landscape for the ICB, and with the best will in the world, we don't need to lose many key people for individual priorities to become threatened. And of course, during a time of change, that's a possibility. So as Libby said, setting out a rational approach to how we make the decisions means at least the board can be conscious about, so we don't just drop things, or we don't just overstretch people as maybe has happened sometimes in the past, and we'll keep that very open and transparent for the board. But I do think there's probably more to come back on this, given the level of change and the timescale over which we're now dealing with that.
Okay, thank you. And can I invite Loper, please?
Thank you. And my question is really about digital and data, and in the plan, I've raised this before, but I still have some concerns that we should make decisions now, and particularly around tools like the NHS app, which we will then need for strategic commissioning for the future. And I noticed on page 252, when we talk about commissioning of strategic population health management data, I think, you know, very, very fully supportive of that. But given where we are, perhaps we should triangulate that with a cluster view to try and work out whether what we're planning to do aligns with what they are planning to do. And same with the digital inclusion framework, for example. I think we should just triangulate some of that across the cluster so that we don't, so the short-term decision-making doesn't impact our future commissioning.
Thanks, Lopa. Libby?
Yeah, absolutely agree, 100%. And I think with all of these key priorities and the development, particularly development of the strategy, we're working really closely with our colleagues in Cornwall because we need to make sure that we're very aware as we go into clustering of whether, you know, that those views align or if there are any issues there. So we are continuing to do that. I agree with you. I think digital and data is a huge enabler looking forward in terms of our strategic commissioning. And we know that we have got some challenges at the moment in terms of our sort of capacity and capability to do that. So it will be a real key of focus of our one of our key enablers going forward as we bring the strategy to board in September and then look at our delivery plan for the strategy then going forward from September.
Sam, if it's on this point.
Yeah, just to add to that. So Lopa, I think we do have a challenge on the population health management piece because when you look around the cluster in the system, we're using various different population health management software, and in some patches we're using 3 or 4 different versions. So we do need to do a bit of work on that. On your point on the app, this is definitely going to need some working through because depending on which EPR you use as a provider, the level of integration you want with the app is going to be variable. So to try and explain that, if the 3 acute trusts in Devon are move to an Epic system, you want the app really to be a wrapper because of the functionality we've got in Epic, whilst if you're on Oracle Cerner, as is RCHT, you want a deeper level of functionality. So it's going to take quite a bit of working through in order to get that right.
Thanks, Sam. And Steve?
Yeah, no, it's just a point in parallel. I've somehow managed to get on a national working group related to the 10-year plan, but specifically around innovation and technology. So there is also a need to ensure that whatever we align is not just with Cornwall, but actually with a lot of really good work going on nationally. So we've got a way in now to make sure we keep all of that aligned. But it's going to be a really big, as Libby said, a really big part of our agenda going forward, not just about the data feeds that a really good model ICB is going to need to be able to do its job, to give it the insights it needs, but also because of the opportunities that gives to productivity out in the system and supporting patients through their care journey. We need to look at all of that quite quickly once we've got the overall strategy in place so we can really understand what is the digital contribution to all of those things. And that's quite exciting, but also needs some really careful thought.
Thanks, Steve. So I've got Frank and then Salma. So Frank first, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Steve and Libby have already mentioned the strategy, and I think we need to obviously concentrate on the operation plan, the annual plan, the oversight framework. But for me, the strategy is probably the most important thing of all of these. We've got to deliver this year, but we've also got to, at the same time, get that strategy right. The exec will be aware that I had some concerns about whether there was enough different thinking, enough different community focus on it. I have been to a couple of the development sessions and I'm pleased to say I think that they are really quite good. But ultimately the strategy, as Sam has said, is going to be about hospitals doing something completely different and the community doing something completely different, and all of us understanding that and actually starting now to try and make sure that is delivered next year, because it is that soon. So, the complexity of all of this is we've got to do all of it all at the same time, but the strategy is vital. And having been in Devon 25 years, we've had many, many plans to move stuff to the community that have not delivered. We can't fail this time.
Thank you, Frank. Any response to that, or Steve?
Wholehearted agreement. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank, and thank you also for the feedback on the development sessions, which is really, really useful to hear. Salma.
Thanks, Chair. Frank's covered off most of my question, actually, but there's just one point I wanted to make, and it was the strategy is currently focusing on Devon. Now, I understand this is an annual plan, so it's focused on this year, and there is some reference to a transitionary process. But my worry is, given that the strategy is a priority for this year, if we lose the opportunity to kind of just get that bigger thinking in the first place, we may end up having to reset or redo some parts of that. And you know, the conversations we've had about priorities and making the best use of scarce resources doesn't really seem to be a sensible way of doing things. So I'm just concerned that, particularly if you look at the clinical sustainability strategy, do we need to take a bigger lens and look at the whole picture across the cluster when we're setting the strategy?
Steve?
Libby will probably...
Oh, Libby, sorry.
Libby might want to come in. I'll probably steal her thunder. Apologies, Libby. But I mean, again, a really good point. As I've said in a number of our staff meetings and our senior leadership meetings, what we need to end up with at the end of this is a single strategy for the cluster. So as Libby's mentioned, in all of the elements of our own design work, we have Cornwall people embedded so that we can ensure that it's aligned. But in order to bring two strategies together, Devon needs to have a strategy. So so we need to get a really clear idea about what we need to achieve. Cornwall's slightly further ahead, but very quickly we'll then need to bring those two things together. In the absence of any strategy, it becomes really difficult to have that conversation. And keeping them embedded means it shouldn't be any different. You know, we should have a lot of common alignment, not least because the challenges that we face are very similar. You know, there are obviously key differences. There are key differences within just the Devon system, but it would be very surprising if we came out with a completely different answer, and we're mitigating against that anyway.
Thank you, Steve. And Tandy, please.
Just a quick one from what you're describing regarding Cornwall and Devon and making sure that the two strategies do end up being aligned at some point. Is there a plan to have a specific sort of piece around risk in there? I'm just worried that in that process we may end up with some things dropping off that we haven't anticipated, either this end or that end, and that we have some things that sort of just disappear. So I'm just wondering whether there's a specific plan to have a risk map of some description, as we call it.
Thanks, Tandy. I might just invite Philippa to respond to that, and then Steve, if you want to add anything. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So we've already got plans to work as part of the strategy development to identify the risks to the strategy as the objectives are being clarified. But there is also a piece of work that needs to be done in relation to the strategic risk facing the cluster as well. And I think that part of the proposal coming to the board to approve delegation to a joint committee needs to include an understanding of the potential risks that will be faced and how we will be managing and mitigating those. So I would anticipate that as part of the report that comes to the extraordinary board meeting.
Thanks, Philippa. Any other questions on the update to the annual plan there? Lopa.
Thank you for this, and I know that it's been raised before. It's a very minor thing, or at least, but might appear minor, but it's about the use of language. On page 269, we're using the term birthing people. And we know that there's been the Supreme Court ruling, and we know that there is now guidance from EHRC. I can understand you use it for inclusivity, but at the same time, the environment has changed a little bit. So I just wondered if we need to revert back to pregnant woman rather than birthing people as a term that we use.
Okay. Can I perhaps ask Libby to take that away and have a look at that? I think it's a good point, Lopa. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions on the update to the annual plan? So I'd just like to say thank you to Libby and team, by the way, for the immense amount of work that has gone into this, and this is just a real progress from where we were 12 months ago in terms of our planning. So really want to thank you and your team for that. We have 3 actions. The first is to approve the 6 revised and consolidated annual plan objectives. Is the board happy to approve those revisions? Thank you. We'll take those as approved. We're also asked to approve the updated annual plan and the supporting delivery and enabling plans. Is the board happy to approve that? Thank you very much. And then we are asked to endorse the deprioritisation process for pausing, delaying or stopping activities that no longer align with current organisational priorities. Is the board happy to endorse that process? Thank you very much. We endorse it. Let's move on to item 4.1, which is the progress on the requirements of the NHS Oversight Framework, segment 4. I'm going to ask Philippa to introduce this, and then I'd like to invite, sorry for not giving you advance notice, but just invite Mark Cook and Alison Williams if there's anything that you wanted to add to what Philippa is saying. Doesn't matter if you don't have, but I want to just give you the opportunity to do that. So over to you, Philippa.
Thank you. So the report sets out a short briefing of the new NHS Oversight Framework. The board will be very familiar with the previous oversight framework that we've been working to, and will recall that we received a report at the last board meeting in May in relation to a self-assessment against our progress against this. Felt in light of that it was important that we brought information to the board formally about the new NOF. It is important to note that ICBs won't be allocated to segments against the new NOF, but it is still something that we would want to be taking into account in our work. I won't go through the details that are in the report because they're there to read, but I think there is a further opportunity later in the private meeting to discuss the progress against our NOF for segmentation in relation to the previous NOF.
Thanks, Philippa. Is there anything, Alison, that you'd like to add to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the paper is really helpful to lay out what the new framework is going to look like. And probably a couple of things to just remind the board of. The first is that under the old regime, there was very much an obligation at system level for partners to work together on resolving some of the sustainability challenges that exist within individual organisations and the system. The new framework is very organisationally focused. The rating will be very organisationally focused, as will the oversight arrangements through any RSP process. And I think I'm probably preaching to the converted here. There is a recognition that for many organisations that are struggling meeting some of these metrics, the solutions won't reside within the organisations alone. So that ability, even though it will be very organisationally focused, to hold the solutions at system level will probably become more important, not less important. And I know that sort of region are looking at the regional oversight and governance arrangements, but I would just encourage the board to recognise that you're all in this together as organisations in the system, even though the oversight framework might point in a slightly different direction. I think the other thing to draw to the board's attention is that the RSP support to organisations will be very different in the future. And under the previous regime, people like me have been embedded in the system, providing some delivery support. It's unlikely to look like that in the future. What again I would encourage chief execs particularly to look at is how the system assets can be looked at, and by that I mean the skills and the people that you have got in your system to be supporting each other where there are specific delivery challenges. So I think it's going to put more responsibility in the system to be looking collectively at how you support each other to improve. And I know that's something, Steve, that's on your agenda, and for Phil and Sam, you'll be aware of that. But it may require more altruistic approaches from trusts particularly, to be offering up support to their neighbours to help them where they've got particularly challenging performance areas in a way that they haven't had to before. So it's aligned to the paper, but it was just something that I thought the board needs to give some due consideration to in good time as the new arrangements bed in. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. Those are helpful, really helpful perspectives. Steve, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I had a whole range of thoughts when you were talking about that, because I think we've been on, I think, quite a rapid journey over the last few months around that change of focus, as you described, towards sovereign organisational accountability. And we've still got a bit of a way to go on it, particularly as we develop the cluster and think about what the ICB's role is. For me, there's a couple. What it helpfully does, I think, this shift, is it really clarifies the roles of all of the players in the system. And for the ICB, the cluster, taking on that role of strategic commissioner, which I think is a different way of taking system responsibility, if you like, about calling out on behalf of patients and others where things have to change, and then finding through our commissioning approaches, how do we make that happen? With the engagement, of course, with clinicians on the ground to help us think that through, but ultimately us taking those decisions. I think that level of clarity and role, I think, is going to be really helpful to make some of the changes that maybe we've struggled with previously in the past when we're sort of all in it together. I think the bit around helping providers, excuse me, to work together, I think that becomes no more important than in the development of the neighbourhood teams, because that when we think about what we're going to be trying to do at that level, the ICB, the commissioner, needs to think about how do you bring together complex supply chains of acute mental health and others, VCSE, our primary care colleagues, and unite everybody about a common aim and a common outcome. That's going to take some really different thinking about how you do commissioning and how you get every part of that chain to work towards that common interest above their own sovereign interest. And over and above that, our role in the future being to, partly our role being to create a flourishing provider system that can be capable of doing the things that are our ambitions, informed by patients and others. And I think that is about how do we create a culture where organisations can come together to solve problems, how we can convene that, maybe in a different way than we've done in the past, and also how we talent spot, how we grow people across the system to be able to take on some of the knottiest challenges. And quite often in the past, I think the NHS has kind of thrown people into the challenge, some really challenging things, and then not supported them. So there's something for us in our wider role, without stepping over the boundary into sovereign organisations, about how do we encourage that kind of behaviour. So I think it's quite an exciting future if we get all of that right. And I think it is also, it's going to, in very many ways, feel different than the past. Actually, it's going to be focused on the same things and hopefully get better outcomes as a result.
Thanks, Steve. Mark, is there anything you want to add to Alison's perspectives on this, and I'll open it up for wider questioning?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a couple of things. Completely agree with what Alison and Steve have just articulated, but just to emphasise the fact that despite the sort of move towards individual organisation accountability around the way that the NHS regulation system will work, absolutely it'll be about clearly holding boards to account for their role in the way that Steve has just described, so completely agree with that. Just a couple of, if you like, technical things to add on top of that. Philip is right, the ICB is not being segmented this year, but part of that is because of the complexity of the clustering and so on. That doesn't mean to say that we still don't have a role in oversight and regulation, and we'll still be talking to you about ensuring that you have the right capability and delivery of the things that Steve's just articulated, including the development of your strategic plans and making sure that you can deliver on behalf of the public for the mandate that the government's given us. So I think that's really important to keep hold of. Just a couple of other tiny things. The segmentation for providers has been slightly delayed because we're making sure that the detail within the modelling and the metrics that produce those will be published, we understand, at the end of August, and with that will be the ability for the public to have access to the metrics that underpin all of that. So that's due to come towards the end of next month. We're not quite in August yet, are we? End of next month. And then just a slight nuance in terms of the way that some of the detail was described in the paper. The Provider Improvement Programme, or NPIP, only organisations in input will be placed in segment 5 rather than those in segment 5 will be considered for input. It's just a very subtle difference in terms of the way it'll actually work. So thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Graham.
Well, actually, Mark, you've largely answered my question. My understanding was that the assessments of the levels for providers had been completed, but you were saying it's actually not being completed, because I was going to ask the question, which is, even though there's no ICB assessment for the reasons you've outlined, there are for providers, but you're saying it's not come out yet. When it does come out, therefore, building on some of those points about the role of the ICB, will the ICB still be expected to look at the assessments and progress? And if so, what role might that then imply for the ICB? Would that just unknown at this point? Thank you.
Shall I to respond to that? Really good question, Graham. My personal view, although sometimes it does get a little bit grey in this area, the responsibility of the ICB as Commissioner absolutely is to hold to account providers for delivery of their commissioning contracts. People use different terminology around whether that's performance management or not, and we get a little bit confused with the language we use sometimes. But there's no doubt that the payer and the deliverer of service has to have an accountability relationship. So the expectation is that that will continue. I think the subtle difference that NHS England will play is that we will be looking at the capability and holding to account this board and the cluster board for how it commissions its services and whether it's done that well, and then holding to account the providers in terms of whether it's delivering those services and whether there's other things which aren't covered by the contract which have to be taken into account in terms of the oversight and regulation of those boards. For example, good governance wouldn't be in the contracts, but it will be absolutely an expectation of NHS England.
Sam, on this point.
Sorry, Mark, I just wanted to clarify a point. So I think, were you saying that providers that are currently in the recovery support programme, which will become the PIP, will they automatically go into segment 5? Is that how it will work?
The recovery support programme, RSP, is different to the provider improvement programme. So the fact that your organisation, for example, is coming out of RSG, and others in the Devon system won't be, there will be another process to decide whether that requires the provider improvement programme to be instigated. But that will depend on what comes out in August and September in terms of the new segmentation ratings. Sorry, that's a bit of a technical answer, but
thanks for the clarification, Mark. Phil, is it on this point, or do you want to come in now then before I invite
very
Lopa?
quickly, and don't worry, I'm not going to continue that technical line of inquiry. Just to Graham's point, though, about so do providers know? So we know a draft segmentation, and one of the reasons I understand that it's being delayed until the end of the August is so that the Q1 data can be refreshed in, because I understand that it will be refreshed quarterly. So it's a dynamic assessment that will be undertaken, and it does make a lot of sense, doesn't it, to just wait that period, publish with the Q1 data, and then you're not recovering a position quickly as to why it's changed.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification as well, Phil. And Lopa, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask if Mark can articulate what freedoms are being provided under the new regime. I agree with you that ICBs have got greater accountability, but the counterpoint is what other freedoms are in there to help us deal with the situation.
Again, a very good question. I guess the answer depends on where you are in terms of performance against the metrics and the expectations of this year's planning guidance. The more organisations and systems are able to deliver what was expected at the beginning of the year and what they agreed to plan for, the more freedoms they will have in terms of being allowed to get on with the job rather than having lots of regulation and interventions to try and help support systems to improve. So if that's called more freedoms, then that would be the interpretation of that. Having said that, in the 10-year plan, there's a clear expectation that over the next year or two, there will be the development of further autonomy for organisations that are deemed to be successful. But we're yet to see the detail of how that will work.
Thanks, Mark. And Kay.
Thanks, Chair. And this is just a point of clarification around the RSP. So correct me if I'm wrong. So Devon was in RSP and then we're transitioning to something else. And during the transition, how does that work?
So the approach that we took with Devon was that we would have a general approach to the recovery support programme, even though technically there were four organisations within Devon that were in RSP, because we only have regulation over legal entities, not a system. So we had four organisations in recovery support programme: the ICB, RDUH, Torbay and South Devon, and University Hospitals Plymouth. Because of the new regime, that's now shifting in terms of how those organisations will be regulated, and part of that is because of the very positive progress that Devon's made in terms of recovery from that original recovery support programme. So that was the old regime. We're now transferring to a new regime, and we're just managing over the next quarter or two the transition from one to the other.
Could I come back on? This might be a difficult question. Are we sort of? Is there a lack of clarity about what's going to happen for the next couple of quarters? Is there a risk in that? I suppose that's my thinking. Is there a risk in that? And are we clear about who's doing what over the next couple of quarters?
Yeah. So I don't know whether the board has been informed yet of the outcome of the. Right. Okay. So there is a process going on at the moment, Kay, to articulate the decisions that will be made in order to give that clarity. So each of those four organisations are being reviewed in terms of where they now sit on the original exit criteria for recovery support. Once that's been completed and you've been formally informed of that, those organisations that remain in RSP will be considered, as I said to Sam, for the new phase of the process. Those that have met the criteria or are very close to it will be exited from the recovery support programme, and that will happen. The clarity of that will happen over the next couple of quarters. So we will know which organisations are technically still in RSP / the new regime, and which ones are now exited because they've made sufficient progress, and that's due to come fairly soon.
Thanks, Mark. Any further questions on the requirements of NHS Oversight Framework, Segment 4? Okay, well, thanks for the really rich conversation we've just had on that, which I think has really enhanced our collective understanding of what we're moving into. Just a couple of points to try and summarise some of what we've just covered there. We do notice, as Alison has told us, that even though this is a system which will focus on organisational accountability, there is still system responsibility for the performance of the Devon system. And Steve built on that by saying that the new strategic commissioning role of the ICB puts that focus on the system responsibility, and so that brings some clarity is brought to that in terms of the role and purpose of ICBs that we're moving into. Alison also flagged up to us that the delivery support will change, and she's encouraging CEOs in the system to look at how our collective skills and capabilities in our own system can be used to best effect on those system improvement issues. And we're noting from Mark the delay in the publication of the segmentation of the providers, and we note that that will be coming towards the end of August in order to reflect Q1 data, and we note Phil's comment that this will be a dynamic quarterly assessment, and therefore we'll have changing, potentially changing ratings as we go through the year. So thank you for all of that. We are just asked to note the 25-26 NHS oversight framework, which we do. Thank you. If we move on to item 4.2 now, which is the delivery management outcome report, and I'm going to invite Libby Ryan Davis to take us into this paper. Thanks, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the paper as read, but just pull out a few key points, if that's okay. So the paper submitted today outlines the month 2 report on the delivery of the operational plan for 25-26. And just to note that this is the first running, the report on the first running of the delivery management process that that the board approved for month 2, and obviously there are areas within the process that need to be refined as this process beds in, and we have already evolved and strengthened the process moving into month 3 since this report that the board has today was shared and discussed in the relevant committees. The appended dashboard gives the position against all of the operational plan metrics, and this will now include plan and actuals as well as variance each month, so that detail is shown. The report and the Appendix A focus solely on the metrics that are adversely to variant plan in month 2. And the main report details the current system position, and just to pick out a few just key messages. So on finance, remaining a high level of high-risk SIPs and continuing risk with regards to cash management. Performance, we've got significant variance on RTT 52-week performance, primarily driven by RDUH. ED performance is behind plan, especially for mental health in ED. And demand is above plan in terms of IS spend. And for workforce, whole time equivalent is below plan, but spend above plan. And then in Appendix A, Chair, is a further breakdown by organisation of all of the performance, just to detail, just to provide that all of that detail at organisation as well. So happy to take any specific questions, but as said, just to note, it's the first iteration of this report, so it will evolve as we go into month 3. Thank you,
Thanks,
Chair.
Louis. So Steve, and then I'll invite Graham to come in.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think we've been developing this process now for a few months. This, I think, represents our first step towards becoming the more proactive contract manager within the system as part of our strategic commissioning role. It is really clearly rules-based. I mean, rules are always, they're specific, but sometimes we need to keep working on them. We think we've got the right ones for this year to keep everyone focused. What I would say, and we had I had this reaction, I think we had the reaction at our system assurance and group a while ago. We haven't quite got the balance of this report right yet, because there's something about being really clear and crisp, but also providing enough detail about what sits behind it. The first report we saw, which indeed we took to SIAG, it wasn't clear enough. It was too high level to be able to get into some of the detail. We've erred probably slightly further the other way this time, but we need to find a way of bringing together what is quite a complex set of data, metrics, triggers, interventions and escalations in a way that the board can really see the wood for the trees on it. So I just wanted to acknowledge we thought the detail was more helpful this time than being too summary, because at least for those who love these sorts of things, you can get your teeth into it, but we need to think really carefully about how we get that clarity going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Graham.
Well, as ever, Steve, you said a lot of the things I was going to ask about, but I shouldn't have sat next to you, Libby, because you clipped me around the ear because I keep picking on your papers. But anyway, so I mean, I think we all recognise that this is much needed and much welcomed as something, and we are moving our way through it. So just a piece of feedback as I currently see it. Much needed. I think pitching it at the right level is really important, and undoubtedly this is way too detailed, and I do feel slightly offended at people cutting and pasting Excel spreadsheets into a document I can't even read when I blow them up, frankly. And the optics are poor because it looks like we've got time on our hands, which I know we haven't got. So I think we really do need to think about what is the right level of the presentation at various points. And I don't think it should ever be the tactical plan at board level. I think it should be after the strategic cell has reviewed it. And it should be by exception only. And I think FPC should be at a lower detail, but not too level. So I think it is all about how do we balance the right detail at the right levels that we need, because it is really important. We really do need it. But I think just getting that matching the levels and what can you do about it, you know, who is empowered to actually be able to look at this and make some decisions about it. So if we make it a decision-driven process, I think it will put us in better position. So just my reflections. So I hope it helps rather than be critical. Really thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Steve, to respond to that, please.
It was just to say, I think it might be good to have an offline conversation with chairs of the committees who will see this, to get your feedback, your input into how we might design it in a better way, so that we can deal with some of those issues. But I couldn't agree more with what you said, Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think this becomes more important, doesn't it? At the moment, we've got this to take assurance on the process. I think as we're using this to take assurance on delivery, the points that Graham is making become really, really important. And I like the idea of taking that offline for a conversation with those board members that have a particular interest in this, and those committee chairs that will be using it. So we'll take that as an action from this discussion. Kay, please.
Thank you, Chair, and absolutely agree with what's been said. It's a really, really good process, and getting the outputs right is going to be important, isn't it? A couple of reflections on that for me were there's something about how we synthesise all this information and understand the interdependencies between the different metrics. So they are all linked to each other, aren't they, in some way or another? So how do we do that in a way that really adds value to our understanding? And then, but the thing I'd like to draw out is the action focus in terms of what we're seeing. So when we are seeing problems emerging, we need to be very pacey and very action focused about what we're doing about it. So how do we build that into our reporting and understanding so that we don't, you know, the worst case scenario, and that we do see it quite often, don't we, is that generally in the NHS is things can drift for a period of time, and we all know it's not going as it should, but we don't get the actions in place, and the actions don't get the change. So how do we get that pace in terms of action and response?
If I could just build on that, sorry, Steve, bring you in first. Okay. So just to build on that, I think there's a risk here, isn't there, that if we're not on top of some of these issues during August, that we get into autumn and we're managing a bigger problem than we need to. So I suppose one of the things we just need assurance on is that this is up and running now, and that we'll be seeing some impact of this escalation process that we're putting in place. Do you think we're geared up to be able to focus on this throughout August, so that as we get into the autumn we're on top of it?
So absolutely from the process perspective, this is up and running now. As I said, we have made some amends to evolve that into month 3, because the report today is obviously the first run through of it. We've had another run through since that for month 3. So in process terms, absolutely, and through in terms of the system leadership group and the whole of the governance through, absolutely. I think some really, really great feedback today, and that conversation offline with the committee chairs I think is going to be key, because we absolutely have to get this right in terms of assurance on delivery, as well as assurance that we've got a robust process.
Thanks, Libby and Steve.
Yeah, it was just to come back on that point. I think it's been very much part of all of, I know, the board's thinking when we signed off quite a challenging plan that you can't lose it early on because you'll never catch up. The way in which the triggers have been developed, particularly for the finance ones, I would say, are there to give early warning. So they are trying to be as prospective or anticipatory as possible. So things like the level of SIPs that are unidentified month by month, and whether that's going in the right direction against agreed trajectories. And whilst I think the report isn't entirely clear about the actions being taken, in future we will make sure we are, because those actions are absolutely being taken. All the peer-to-peer meetings have happened. The second round of meetings or escalations are in the diaries. And I know we've got a meeting with the senior team of one of our providers because of the number of issues which they're off. So we've taken that to the next level of escalation, and that meeting's happening in 2 weeks' time. I think what we haven't been able to do for the board, for some obvious reasons, but because we are bedding this in, is to be really crisp, as I said earlier, about where are we, what are the triggers, what's caused them, and what we've done about it. And I would hope that that will be the thing that comes through, and we'll have that discussion offline about how to make sure that works properly for independent members.
Thank you, Steve. That's helpful. Lopa, please.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it was a really good analysis, and I welcome the real detail. But I then left thinking, should I panic or should I not panic? That's the problem. Because there's swathes of red in some places and swathes of amber in other places. And by the very nature of the way we're using the RAG rating as well as the detail, we'll only get to green at the end of the year. So my question related to that is, does it give us sufficient flexibility to course correct? You know, what is the interpretation of the reg? Because the problem is, if you look at all the reds all the time and you can't actually do anything about them within that particular month, then what is the value of that rating? So that's question number one. And then secondly, if we project it forward, I thought some of these things need to be aligned to population health improvement ambitions. So, for example, on page 133, it talks about dentistry underspend due to the rebasing of the programme. So it's focus on urgent care at the expense of routine care. So we know that in dentistry, if you ignore routine care, that's a problem for the future. So that is not going to deliver population health improvement. And yet, on there, it was an amber. So I would have thought, well, OK, amber, I don't need to worry about it. So do you know what I mean? Are we pinning some of this to strategic aims?
Steve.
Yeah, again, a really, really good question, Lopa. I was thinking about whether we need a panicometer on the front of this. Probably not, but I take the point, because actually it can be difficult to interpret. Again, I think it's partly because there's so much detail in there. What is it that's really the important things we need to focus on? But also, I think, to link back to Kay's point, is because we've set really clear criteria and quite harsh RAG ratings. If people are going off, simply so that we can try and course correct as early in the year as possible and not be too permissive early on. So that sort of agrees with your point about some of this is not far off. It's looking red because we need to get it back on track. I think the issue around dentistry, we could probably have a much wider discussion around. We've got some clear requirements around our share of the 700,000 urgent dental cases. Clearly, there are much wider challenges around the delivery of routine dental care, and in many ways, what we are doing is probably it's not enough in the prevention space, but that's something we're going to need to look at in future. But we do need to ensure we've delivered on that target, because that was a key requirement of this operating plan. I think the more general point I would make is that this has been developed as a 1 year, that the operating plan is very much a 1 year thing. The strategy will start to help us inform what we're doing over a longer period of time, and that will be much clearer about how we need to focus on things like population health, neighbourhood teams, in order to effectively change the demand curves in a whole range of areas over the medium term. That's not been really reflected, other than the specific demand management work we're doing this year, which is largely tactical. The strategic stuff, I think, is got to come, and we've got to start working on that quickly.
Thank you for that, Steve. The thing is, the tool, if it's effective, we'll carry on using it. So it is about how to make the tool as efficacious as possible. Well,
perhaps if you're willing to be involved in that discussion around how we design that, that would be really helpful.
Thanks, Lopa. I've got Mark, is it on this point or a separate point?
No, it's on this point. It's just a very quick observation. The sort of prediction of what you've just been talking about should, in theory, it's not perfect science yet, then reflect your quarterly segmentation that we were talking about earlier. So the two things are very, very closely connected, particularly on the tactical stuff. We haven't quite cracked the strategic way that we do oversight yet, but certainly on the tactical, if you're looking at your performance now, that should be a good indicator of where you'll be in the next quarter.
Thanks, Mark. And Salma, please.
Thanks, Chair. I need to get better at raising my hand quicker because most of my points keep getting picked up earlier. It was the point about the data. I think Lopa's covered some of it off. At the last People and OD committee, we discussed the development of some of the key metrics, and one of the challenges I had as a committee chair was trying to kind of make sense of the sea of reds. There's a lot of information, a lot of red, and without seeing some of the profiles alongside it, I couldn't work out whether some of that was a seasonal variation or planned in some way, or whether this was actually something that was more statistically relevant. And we talked a little bit then about the value of using something like statistical process control, so that we actually know which are the ones that we should be focusing on more than perhaps some of the others. So I just wondered, will that get built in into the process going forward? Or other similar tools, but that's one of the ones that is commonly used. I'm quite used to using that in.
So, Steve, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think a really important point as well. Some of the data doesn't open itself to SPC, either because it's not long enough time scale or for other reasons. But wherever, I mean, I'm an armchair statistician, and you need to be able to see the wood for the trees from common cause variation versus special cause. We will be applying that as we go through this, but partly it's about building up enough data to be able to know when those two, to take the signals out of the noise. So definitely the direction of travel for us.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, Tandy.
Yes, so, mine is a point about transparency and clarity on the reporting. So on page 129, you've got a system summary position. I find that a little bit confusing because you've got language like off track, off plan, below plan, over plan, below trajectory, behind trajectory. And I just think that maybe just some consistency as well as an immediate explanation of what you mean by off track and what you mean by off plan, so it's immediately clear there that if you say off plan, how off plan, but also maybe just choose one of those. Are we using off track instead of off track, off plan, below plan, above plan? It's a little bit confusing, and then when you go back to the RAG rating, it gets even more confusing. The second point is about, and I think this is just a speculative point about the workforce. But maybe, I don't know whether that will be. I'm just wondering whether there's an opportunity here with the clustering bit, because I think the workforce issue in terms of agency spend and all that, we've struggled with that for a long time, and I'm just wondering whether, with the clustering, whether that creates a better opportunity for maybe making a dent on that particular element, but that's just a reflection point rather than an expectation that this should have been addressed in here.
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. I'm not sure I've got the perfect answer to that question. I think I'm not sure where Cornwall are in relation to their progress with workforce. It'll be different, I'm sure, to us. They haven't been as challenged as a system as we have. In terms of agency usage, we've been doing pretty well over the last couple of years in reducing that significantly. The only kind of spike at the moment is RDUH, as Sam will know. And the Trust has got plans in order to reduce that, but we've been making significant progress over the last couple of years in reducing agency. So I think there's just one issue that we need to focus on within the system. But in terms of Whether the clustering arrangement will help us or not, I don't yet know, is the honest answer to that. It's too early to tell.
Okay. Thanks, Piers. And Alison?
Notwithstanding everything that's just been said, I just wonder in terms of as the arrangements mature in the ICB and the oversight arrangements, in the summary position, it might be useful to just articulate the mitigating actions that are being taken. That might give greater assurance then to the board that those things are not just being identified, but this is what we are doing about them. And it will come through your processes, so it should be fairly straightforward to do. And the final point, in the middle of the data, you will have seen it, but it is great to see the UEC performance finally feels like there's getting some grip there. And after sort of being in RSP for a couple of years now, that is a real success and one that should be celebrated. Not too soon because winter's coming and everything else, but you would have given your eye teeth to have had that performance 18 months ago.
Thanks, Alison. I'll ask Steve to respond to that, and then I'll just ask Libby to sum up her thoughts from the perspectives that we've just had. Steve.
Yeah, I'm really glad you called that out. Actually, it has been a remarkable change. Actually, the data since this report, because I'm still completely obsessed with Shrewd. I haven't been a provider now for 18 months, but I still want to know how many ambulances every day. Actually, has taken a further step down. There's been a step change even from that improved position there's been a few bumps, but over the last probably 4, 5, maybe even 6 weeks now. And I did text Mark because it's particularly prevalent in UHP to congratulate them that they've taken another step down. And of course, they've still got the benefit of the UTC to come yet. So you're absolutely right. Winter is coming and there are active conversations going on about how we hold on to all of that going into the winter. But we're starting in a position, as you say, that last year we would have given our eye teeth for.
Thanks, Steve. So on this point, Sam, and then I'll ask Libby to summarise her thoughts following this discussion.
Well, firstly, Chair, just to absolutely support Steve's point, we should congratulate UHP on their recent progress, shouldn't we? Because they've done really, really well. It just led me into a thought, Libby, and I'm in danger of adding even more detail to your report, so this might be a problem. But, part of the new segmentation approach is going to come with league tables. So we are going to get into a series of comparative conversations as well. And currently, in the way we've set up the report, we're just looking at people in Devon. So I don't know whether we're going to need some sort of a section that sort of benchmarks us against others, whether that's systems or providers we might want to just think about offline.
Thank you, Sam. Over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. This is a difficult one to summarise, isn't it? But no, I think it's for me, it's been a really, really helpful discussion because I think as a team, this has been a big ask to put a process like this in place to oversee what is a really, really challenging plan this year, and meet everybody's requirements. I think there's a lot of key things that colleagues have said which we can take away immediately in terms of detail, language, presentation. The discussion with the committee chairs, I think, is going to be very, very welcomed so that we can absolutely get this report right at the different levels, because I'm conscious that there's an ask from our system leaders at System Leadership Group for a particular type of report, level of detail. There's the requirements of the committees at that level in terms of assurance, and there's the requirement of the board. So we need to get all of that right. And I think probably what we've tried to do is to try and do all that in one. And probably that's where we've got to a point where we've got probably too much detail and then not enough detail. So just really thank you for the discussion today. It's really, really helpful and will guide us as a team to get this right for the next board meeting. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Libby. So the board thanks you and your team for the immense work that's gone into this, and as Graham said, much needed and much welcomed. I think we've recognised today that there's some wider development of this which we're going to take forward by inviting committee chairs and other interested board members to help us to develop this into what will become a proactive contract management system meeting the requirement for us to have that in our role and purpose of the newly formed cluster ICB. So thanks, and we look forward to seeing the next iteration of this at the next board meeting. So thank you. We now move on to, there's a few references to winter in that last discussion. We now move to the winter planning item on the agenda at 4.3. John Finn is unable to be with us, so we don't have anyone to present the report to us, but I know that everybody has read it. I know there are one or two questions which we can take and put to John if we can't answer them, but it would be quite useful, I think, just to perhaps have provide a perspective on this from Sam. So I want to invite Sam to just give us a perspective on that, and perhaps a perspective from Steve as well, and then we can open it up for any specific questions that people have. So Sam.
Thanks, Chair. So, well, I'll start with almost where we left off, which is, as Steve says, I think the really important thing to start with by recognising is the improvement we've made in the last few months, particularly around some of our UEC performance, as well as our ambulance handover stats. But we can't be complacent because we know winter's going to be tough, and we need to start. We've already started planning now. We've also got some really good feedback from last winter about areas we need to improve on. So one of the things that really stands out for me, and I think we touched on at a previous board, is both vaccination rates for staff, but also for members of the public. So I think we do need to get on the front foot with that, both within our provider organisations, but also think about our comms campaign, because that will really stand us in good stead, particularly if we have a difficult flu season. So that's a plea up front. We have also started working coordinated by colleagues at the ICB around how do we put in place and further strengthen our work mutual aid type processes and our governance processes. So in terms of how we work across the system. So there's a lot more to do, but I feel we've got to build on the progress we've made.
Thank you, Sam. Anything you'd wish to add, Steve?
Yeah, it's probably just a couple of things. So yeah, it was really, I think last year we had a number of steps forward in the way that we managed winter. I want to come back to the winter director role, because you'll see in the paper that we're proposing a slightly different approach this year, partly for practical reasons, given where the ICB is, and also looking to join up with Cornwall Wasp. We'll probably still have two separate winter directors, ensuring that we can bring that together and start that process of bringing the cluster together through these periods. I think some of the key things that really worked well last year from a system coordination point of view was firstly the training and clear expectations for on-call directors and managers, the upfront planning, but also the pre and post weekend planning processes, so that it was very live and dynamic. We were both ensuring the system was ready before the weekend, and then picking up where things didn't work and trying to get that built in for the following week. And the system coordination work, and particularly the work of our SCC, proving really critical to having real-time information about how the system was working. The difference this year, given those practicalities I refer to, is we have asked the providers to nominate a winter director from within their midst. I think it's today that we're hoping for feedback on that, to see whether that's been successful. My reading of it, and I think it's a different system, it's a different process across the country, is that there are a number of ICBs who do delegate that responsibility to their providers. Clearly, we'd need to make the ICBs, both their on-call directors and their SCC, available to whoever that is. But I think it is an important step that we're trying to take to ask our providers to step up and take responsibility across a system for it. We do have some developing plan Bs and plan Cs if that's not the case, simply because whilst it feels really challenging at ICB level for all the reasons we know around reconfiguration, it is also equally just as challenging at provider level to find people to be able to do this. So I would hope we get that landed, whatever that answer is, in the next few weeks, so that we can then start working in earnest to build on last year's plan, learn the lessons, and get the system ready for the winter in terms of training and preparation.
Thank you, Steve. And Frank, please.
Thank you, Chair. There is And there always has been an emphasis on primary care doing more, and it will translate into very big changes at the front door of the emergency department. I want us to actually think about the statistics around that. There are 4 PCN trials going on at the moment that have delivered an extra 24,000 appointments, and there is better continuity of care, better access to general practice, but it does not translate into massive change at the front door of hospitals. I think at best it's a 0.4% downward trend. That trial is ongoing and will be reported at the end of the year and through this winter. What really matters about people ending up at hospital is who ends up at the hospital, because there's a very big difference between an elderly person getting admitted and unable to get out of the hospital in the first place. So we do need to get really quite sophisticated about what we're doing and who we're targeting, rather than thinking if primary care does X amount, it will translate definitely into a reduction. Primary care's got its part to play, definitely, but we have the lowest ambulance transfers in the country at the moment in terms of and the highest see and treat levels, and we already have about 500 appointments per 1,000 patients per week, 550, and the average across the country is 450. So yes, primary care is absolutely part of the UEC issue, but it's who actually ends up at the front door and how they get treated, and can we prevent them getting to the front door? It needs to be quite targeted.
Thank you, Frank. So I've got Loper, Kay, and then Lincoln. Loper, please.
Thank you. This was with my prevention hat on. One of the thoughts I had was on the vaccinations. What tools do we have to challenge and get better vaccines, more effective vaccines? Are there any tools in the ICB's repository that will allow us to do that? And then secondly, how early can those vaccines be applied and still be effective for winter? So could we start vaccination in summer and still be effective in winter? Sorry, it sounds like clinical questions, apologies.
So probably I'll ask Steve to respond to that.
And you're going to get a non-clinical person answering it. But a couple of things to observe. I mean, Lincoln will be much more steeped in this than I am, but part of the design of the flu vaccine requires an understanding of the flu circulating in the Southern Hemisphere. That then needs to be analysed, and then we try and get the best match. There are timescales around that, which means you can't get the vaccine earlier than those timescales allow. I don't quite know what they are, but we generally, I don't think, get it until about September. But also there's then the issue as well about the intelligence coming out of the Southern Hemisphere about what their winter flu season has been like. And I think, I've only heard it anecdotally, but it's been generally a bit lower this year than previous years. I think the wider question around effectiveness of vaccines beyond flu, that's probably above our pay grade in ICBs, but we know there's some great work going across the country to have really effective vaccines. We've got the new RSV vaccine coming, or has come in now. That will make a difference, particularly for children getting quite serious viral illnesses. And I think as a country, we should be quite proud of the vaccine programmes that we have in place, demonstrated by COVID, of course. It doesn't quite answer your question, but around the flu vaccine, there are issues, which means it can't just be given early because they need that intelligence. I'm completely out of my depth, Lincoln, so I might hand over to you.
Well, with Kay's permission, what I think I'll do is just bring in Lincoln now for your point, but also in case you want to build on any of the conversation we've had on vaccines.
Thanks much for that. So I think, Steve, you have the principles just right. There is a year-round process. WHO will make certain indications, and then globally the vaccine manufacturers will kick into pace. So once they know, they can scale up pretty quickly. You ask a really good question, which goes back to the science of it, and it is where you target the vaccine. So the holy grail is, can you target a part of the flu vaccine that basically gives you longevity and is not as prone to the change, the two markers on the surface, the H and the N, which keep wobbling around. But the bigger question, I suppose, on vaccine, just to say briefly, is the long-standing work of making sure that people are confident and that they actually come forward, and we have mechanisms. So you could have the most effective vaccines in the world if people don't trust them, if they're not coming forward, both our staff and the general public, then we're still at base one, and that's the hard ongoing work that we need to continue. The point I wanted to make was quite interesting, and it was about, should we begin thinking more of seasonal planning? And I was just thinking, yes, we have to do winter. It is the one that we know a lot of data on, but actually, are we beginning to see the heat wave patterns, and are we sensitive to that? And should we have a director that looks year-round and begins to make sure that we're resilient for both extremes of temperature?
Thanks, Lincoln. And sorry, Steve.
Just so I think it might be fruitful to have a conversation with the Directors of Public Health about how we might do that. I think you make a really good point. There are different pressure issues throughout the year, and winter is just a particular case. But so maybe we can set up a discussion, Lincoln, and get some advice on how we might get that to work.
Thanks, Steve. Kay.
Thanks, Chair. So what I was interested in is how we will think about managing the potential for industrial action during winter, and what we might have learned from previous experience, and how we get ourselves ready for that possibility.
So I know John has built this into some of his work, but Steve, is there anything that you're able to say, or Sam, anything that you're able to say? We can obviously ask for John's opinion as well, which we can email around to people afterwards.
Yeah, of course. And I may have been saved by the CMO walking back into the room, given he's been leading on IA for us at the moment. I think the point I would generally make is it does look like the risks of industrial action, as we know, is increasing, and it may well hit us in the winter. That will have impacts. We need to accept that will be the case. I think if there's a positive in this, and we've probably seen it through the current just ending industrial action, the NHS has learned a lot of lessons over the recent past about how to manage that in the best way that reduces harm to patients. So whilst part of the answer will be it will depend on the nature and the extent of that industrial action, we will be drawing from all of those lessons to ensure that that focus on reducing harm for the whole population, not necessarily just those coming in the front door, but those who are delayed in their treatments, will help us to manage it better. It's a bit of a woolly answer at the moment because we just don't know how long a piece of string is on that. Peter, I don't know if there was the general question was how do we start to anticipate the potential industrial action as we go into the winter?
Yeah, and I think what you've said is exactly what was covered in the national picture. Better response in terms of protecting activity this time than in previous industrial action because of a more coordinated response in terms of mutual aid and a national picture, but a recognition of the risk of continued industrial action, particularly in the winter, that the national team are trying to manage.
Thank you, Peter. So we are asked to take satisfactory assurance from the planning for winter and the proposed leadership model, including the approach to the appointment of an ICB winter director. Are we happy to take a satisfactory level of assurance on that? Thank you. And we're asked to agree to consider and approve the final winter plan in correspondence during August. Are we happy to approve that by correspondence in August? We referenced also that this isn't just about winter and that there are different pressure points throughout the year, and a suggestion from Steve that there's a conversation with the 3 directors of public health in Devon about how we might build some of that thinking into our planning. Mary.
Can we just widen that to the DASs as well, because obviously they've got care homes, etc., that they're looking after. So I'm sure Lincoln would think to add them, but I think that would be really worthwhile, making sure the directors of adult social care.
That's a helpful suggestion, Mary. And Penny?
A request. So it's a very helpful recommendation from Chief Exec, but we should recognise there is a vaccination optimisation programme already established, So it's about broadening, but it needs to link back into that, which does include involvement of DASs. Thank you.
Steve.
And just to pick up Mary's point, I think there may be a two-stage process here. I think it would be helpful for the CMO and I to meet with the Directors of Public Health just to describe what a seasonal thing will look like, what the issues might be, and then I think we need to engage both our wider provider community and the DASs in how we might get that to work, whatever that looks like. But I think we need an exploratory discussion first about that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break now before we... the next items on the agenda are the case for change for cardiovascular disease, cardiology and cardiac surgery, and the 3 papers that we have on children and young people. Those are quite substantial items on the agenda today, so I suggest if we just take a 10-minute break and then we come back after that and go into those 2 items. Thanks, everybody. And if we can stop the live stream. Thanks, Josh. stream. Again, thank you, everybody. Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome to part two of the meeting in public. We welcome also Steve Darling, who is the MP for Torbay, and he's here because he has a particular interest in item 4.4, which is the case for change for cardiovascular disease, cardiology and cardiac surgery services, and also in item 4.5, which is the children and young people papers. Steve has submitted some questions to us, which we will, usually we take questions at the end of the meeting, but we will read out the questions that he's submitted as part of these items rather than leaving it to the end of the meeting. So if we move first of all into item 4.4 of the agenda, which is the case, developing the case of change for cardiovascular, cardiology and cardiac surgery services, and I'm going to ask Libby Ryan-Davis to take us into that report. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you, Chair. And just to note that I'll start with the overview of the paper, and then Peter Collins is also going to cover some of the key messages in the report as well. So following on from the decision by the board not to consider a test and learn proposal at the May board meeting, a revised programme of work has been agreed with our system leaders to look more widely at the commissioning response needed for cardiovascular disease in Devon, including a strategy for ensuring sustainable cardiology service provision for the long term. The revised scope of the work includes the development of a case for change for a robust engagement and testing with our clinicians, our overview and scrutiny committees, and our public patients and stakeholders. I think it's really important to clarify at the board today that a case for change does not include any proposals for any future service change at this stage, but it makes an argument based on all the available evidence as to why change is needed. This case for change will allow for a conversation and robust engagement with all the interested parties in terms of cardiovascular disease and cardiology services, so that future services can be planned and delivered in response to the needs of the population in Devon. So the work to develop the case for change is well underway, with a draft being considered by our executive committee in August, ahead of socialising that more widely with our key stakeholders. It is envisaged that engagement on our case for change will commence formally in September. A number of our ICB officers will be attending the Torbay Overview and Scrutiny Committee next week to provide an update on the progress with the development of the case for change. And we will attend again in September to discuss the case for change once that is developed. I think it's really important for the board today as well to understand that alongside the work around the case for change and looking at the future needs of the population for cardiovascular disease, part of the revised scope of the work also focuses on some really key in-year improvements that are needed in terms of our cardiology services to maximise the current capacity to ensure that the patients that are waiting for interventional procedures in Devon are prioritised, and providers are therefore working really closely together across the system to collaborate and ensure that these patients are prioritised and the capacity and available service that we have are maximised. In this in-year work, there are really clearly defined expectations and targets defined as part of the scope of the programme. And we expect the numbers of patients being seen who are currently waiting to increase as that work develops. We have put in place a cardiology review group as part of this revised programme that has been established not only to monitor that in-year recovery and improvements that I've mentioned, but also to oversee the wider engagement programme on the case for change once developed. So at that point, Peter, if I hand over to you, Peter's going to describe the work that's being undertaken to re-engage with the clinicians following the decision to pause the test and learn, and the work underway to develop the case for change. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Libby. And I guess it's useful to remind members of the board and the public that it is the ICB who have the statutory responsibility to develop a case for change on behalf of our population if we feel that there is a need to provide better services around a particular issue like cardiovascular disease, in terms of making sure we are distributing our resources fairly for the whole population in the right place. That, of course, cannot be done without true engagement with our clinicians and our clinical teams. And I think listening to the concerns of elected members and others, including our clinicians last time, we chose to take a pause and recognising that quite rightly our clinicians have concerns about the patients that they see, but also need to consider the wider population. We are taking some time to understand how we usefully get people back into a place where they can truly enter into a collaborative process with us to really understand what we need to do collectively across all of our providers of cardiovascular services, both in our communities, in primary care, and in our acute hospitals, to make sure that we deliver the best outcomes for our population. Including what we are doing will be to reassure our clinicians that the processes that we will use to develop any proposals will be transparent to them, using data that they would recognise, that we apply principles consistently to all of our providers across Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly where that is appropriate, and that we are focused very much on the outcomes for our patients and our population, and that any proposals and the case of change is subject to appropriate external scrutiny by a range of expert opinion. We're in the early stages of doing that, and I think, as Libby, you've mentioned, we will be updating board and our elected members through our local authority and our MPs regularly around progress that we make.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Peter. So before I open it up to questions from the board, as I said earlier, we have some questions submitted relating to this item from our Member of Parliament for Torbay. Philippa, could you let us know what those questions are, and then I'll ask Libby and Peter to respond specifically to those.
Thank you. There's one specific question relating to this item, one to a later item on the agenda, and then one that relates to both items. So we're going to take the first question now, the second question at the next item, and then the third question at the end of that item. The first specific question relating to this item is, please provide more detail into how exactly clinicians will be engaged with as part of this process.
Peter. Or Libby.
I'm happy to take that because we are working hand in glove, and so I think we are both aligned on the fact that our initial case of change, the initial collection of the data on behalf of the population, needs to go out and then be socialised with expert clinicians from across all of our providers, and we have a mechanism by which we are doing that, led by one of our deputy medical directors in the ICB. That will include an opportunity to provide other data, to consult with us on making sure that we have the strongest possible case for change about understanding the needs of our population across a range of cardiovascular disease. And only then will we start to ask our providers, clinicians and others to describe possible options for improving and meeting the gaps that we find in the case for change.
Thanks, Peter. Anything you want to add to that, Libby?
If you don't mind, Chair, just a couple of points. Yeah. Just wanted to add in terms of process terms that stakeholder mapping is a key point when we do any programme of work such as this. And that will involve us identifying the right clinical voices to involve throughout the process so that we have a broad range of perspectives across our providers. We will be setting up some joint working sessions as well to bring those clinicians together so that we're really clearly defining those shared objectives and outcomes that we would expect from this piece of work. Where appropriate, if we do require some independent facilitation or support externally with that, we will consider that so that we ensure and support a really open, constructive dialogue. And the focus will be very much on co-producing those realistic options as we go forward. The only other point to make is that obviously as part of the design work as well, a clinical reference group will be established that is specific to this programme of work to help with the development of the options.
Thank you, Libby. So I'm now going to open it up to questions from board members. Frank, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question, it's just as a clinician working out in the community, I think in microcosm, this whole issue is about what we need to do for the future. Because we're talking about hospitals to community, treatment to prevention. And we as a board have to think of the whole population of Devon and what is best for that population. And Peter's already articulated that. So the question is, what is success? Is success having a fantastic PCI service and doing more and more of it? Or is success driving down the numbers that ever need that? I would suggest that we should be driving it down as far as possible. In Devon, we have very high numbers of cardiovascular disease because of our aged population. In fact, in primary care, it's one of the things we're not doing very well in terms of the prevention. So there's a whole shift of what we need to do to actually provide the right care for the total population of Devon. And we're going to have lots of these questions on lots of services going forward because it's absolutely about the shift to prevention, the shift to community. So it's defining what success is, I think, is quite important.
Thank you, Frank. Steve.
Yeah, the others might want to come in, but yeah, again, really important observation. I would say I don't see those two things as at all mutually exclusive. Yes, we absolutely need to focus on prevention so that people don't need these services, but we also need to ensure that when they do need those services, they are brilliant services for them. Clearly, we've got some in-year, as Libby's described, short-term, really key priorities, which, put simply, there are people waiting too long to get elective care. That needs to be fixed, but actually the long-term aim needs to be to do all of those things, Frank, for all of our services. I think the only nuance I would add to what you say, we absolutely need to look at the equity and how we deliver for our whole population. We also need to do that in a way that recognises the significant differences in our populations in Devon and, of course, the different challenges and assets that those communities have, which, again, kind of leads back, I think, to the core of the strategy being about how we build out from neighbourhoods and really focusing our efforts there. So I don't disagree with the sentiment. I just think we need to have ambition on all of that.
Thanks, Steve. And on that point, Peter?
Yes, I'd just like to make the point that one of the reasons that this work will take longer than people might have expected or anticipated is that we are setting what was, having listened to the concerns that were raised by members of the public and others, we're setting what was a very narrow and single issue in a much broader context. And so recognising the need to understand what services do we need to develop to keep our communities healthier, will help us understand where we spend our resources and how we refine the services that people do need at the sharp end, at the hospital end, but set that in the context of other services that they might need in the community that would stop them ever reaching the point of having a PPCI. So it is a much broader mandate, which is why it will take some time and will require a much broader engagement with the whole range of clinicians, I think, as Libya's articulated.
Thanks, Peter. Now, let me just, so on this point, I think, Alison, did you want to come in and then... Okay. Tandy, was it on this point or...?
No.
Okay, right. So what I will do next then is I'll go to Kay and then Alison and then Tandy. Kay, please. And then Sam and Graham. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. So could I pick up around the draft vision? Because in the draft vision, we don't describe productivity or value for money. So I wonder if we could incorporate that in as part of the vision. And there's two things there for me. Productivity, when we talk about it, we generally mean how has our productivity changed over time, comparing us to ourselves. Value for money is more about how do we compare to others. So I think both of those are going to be important factors in understanding how that works in this particular service. And then if I could link down from that into a reflection, which I'll probably pick up in other agenda items today around our data capture and our costing. And I haven't seen evidence for Devon, but there is evidence elsewhere generally in the country about how we are, and we need to get back to a better discipline in terms of data capture and costing. So let's just be aware of that as we go through this piece of work. We need to challenge ourselves to say, have we got the data and the costing at a level that we need to make these decisions?
Thanks, Kay. So I'll just invite Libby or Peter to respond to that. One of you, please. Thank you. Libby.
So yeah, I absolutely agree on both fronts. I think in terms of the vision, absolutely. You know, as this programme of work develops, I'm sure the vision isn't set in stone. We can do that. And part of the case for change and the engagement that we're going to do on the case for change is to ensure that we pick up on all of these things that we need to have as part of the programme of work. And in terms of data capture and costing, absolutely. I think that's just an action that I can take away to ensure that that's robustly as part of the programme.
Thanks, Libby. And I'll just invite Steve also to come in on Kay's point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the vision, how looking at the way the document's been written, some of those things are inherent. The sort of productivity, in fact, productivity is mentioned in how we're going to realise it, and the value for money is sort of slightly inherent in the move to prevention, but I think we can make that much clearer. On the data and costing thing, I think, yeah, you make a really good point, and it links to the development of the cluster and the new ICB, is we need, I think it's been described nationally, to unlock the gears of the money because much of it is block. There are a number of areas now, this is one, but children's are another, where we're probably going to have to do that. We're going to have to start chipping away at that to understand programmes according to the priorities, but we also need, as a skills development piece for the new cluster, to be developing our cost accountants and our data analysts such that we can eventually get all of this unlocked, because over the years, as you know, it's been moved quite considerably.
Thanks, Steve. So to Alison, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I firstly say I commend the board for taking the brave decision to pause and reflect on this, because it's absolutely the right thing to do and to extend the scope of the work. And I know that will bring some uncertainty for longer for some people, but it's absolutely the right thing to do because you get to the right answer about the whole pathway of care. So if I could just lodge that. My point, though, is I happened to be at the Torbay board when the cardiologists came and gave an impassioned view about their services. And I was very impressed with both their professionalism, but also the passion they had for their local services. And the debate did open up to the collective responsibility that clinicians and leaders in a system have for the cardiac health of the whole population. And I strongly got the sense that, you'd be pushing at an open door to have the wider conversation. What I would say, though, is that, like there always is in these circumstances, a lot of tension and anxiety caused by the way that this started. And none of us would start from here, would we? But I think quickly getting the cardiologists, particularly from RDUH and Torbay together, making them feel absolutely part of that solution. And I know this is intended as part of the process, but I think signalling that out of today very openly and quickly getting those people in the tent to be part of the solution would be very powerful. And I think you'd be pushing at an open door because they want to be part of the solution, is what I heard.
Thank you for that perspective on the Torbay board presentation, Alison. Steve, would you like to respond to that?
I think I'm going to upset the medical director because I keep jumping in on things that maybe he wants to talk about. But I mean, it's really heartening, but I would say not surprising that there is real passion. I think what we need to do is recognise and harness that passion for the things that we need to solve. So it is great to see that. I don't think we'd want to be in the position we're in about people feeling quite bruised by a process, as you say, that should never have happened in the way that it quite did. I think one of the important things around developing a case for change that everybody signs up to is it gets people signed up to the problem, and doing that well and doing that carefully. I was reflecting back on our last board meeting. I think Salma may have challenged me on this. I was way too ambitious about how quickly we could do this, because actually we do need to think about the human beings in the system and getting them back on board, and we needed to think about the scope of this being much larger than just the single question that was being posed to us last time. Partly by reassurance, I think there's much more to do on this, and it's probably gone a little slower than we would have hoped up to this point. But alongside the development of the case for change, there is a process of organisational development, shall I say, to help clinicians from both RDUH and TSD to reflect on what's happened, and effectively, as I think the CMO has responded to, get people into the right frame of mind then to come and work together on a problem. If we'd done this differently, we wouldn't have had to have done that, but that is a reflection on the fact we both we need to do it, and it's really important if we're going to get the right answer to get those clinicians absolutely engaged and involved in helping us to solve it. So all good points, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of that passion.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Steve. Next, I think I have Tandy.
Yes, acknowledging the history of where we've come with this, which is from a specific issue. And that we've moved on to a more wider, broader population-based approach, which is about the visioning and the entire population. I'm sort of wondering whether actually this is a good candidate for seeing it as a cluster issue. In other words, that whether we're going to see this as across the whole cluster rather than do this for Devon, and then later on end up with variation in provision in the two spaces, and then needing to review either Cornwall or Devon to match up. So given where we're at now, I'm wondering whether if this is a population piece, a strategic piece, whether we really need to be looking at it from that perspective. Obviously, it's very well aligned to our new role as commissioners in terms of focusing on prevention and stuff, but I think there might be need to rethink there.
Thanks, Tandy. Steve.
Yeah, really good question, Tandy. I think probably just to acknowledge, because of where we were, this has been a bit of immediate work that we've had to do with a largely Devon focus, but the scope of it is peninsular, and it is involving all of our providers. We haven't yet taken this through the joint committee process, partly because there hasn't been anything specifically to take through. We've been just fixing our process. But notwithstanding the issues around when clustering happens and when it doesn't, we do intend to ensure that this becomes a joined-up process between the two existing ICBs going forward. So I think it's a really key and important point for us. So,
whether budging it as case for change brings up the anxieties in people when they just see case for change. So maybe there might be need to sort of, in terms of presenting it and what the public see when they see case for change, it's like you're suggesting you're going to change something, which of course you're not.
Yeah, So the first thing is we're not just simply going to present a case for change. What we want to do is co-develop what are the issues in the system. We have some views, and I think we're absolutely right to have some views on behalf of the population about what doesn't look like it's good enough at the moment. But clearly there's an awful lot of good stuff, and there will be other views around the system. So part of the re-engagement with clinicians is to ensure that we have the most robust view of all of the issues. Case for change may not be quite the right framing of that, but that's essentially what it is. What is the problem that we're all trying to solve, and also what are the really great things that we want to build on, because it's not all just about problems. We also want, as Libby's mentioned, to test that out with elected members through the OSC process, because as well as there being a clinical view about what the issues are, clearly through both public engagement and our OSCs, we can hear what people really think about what's important. So part of my over-ambition when we last spoke is that actually we just need to spend a bit of time gathering all of that together, so actually anyone could pick it up, a member of the public, a clinician, NHS England, and say actually that's a good explanation of the things that they're trying to do better at. And then we get into the process of, particularly with our clinicians and our patients and the public, how do we design a better answer?
And Libby, did you want to build on that?
Just one very quick point that's more about the in-year part of the scope, that the reason that the in-year part of the scope isn't Peninsula is that we've got some quite specific issues in terms of our weights in Devon that as an in-year we need a real focus on. So that piece of work is not, we're not doing that jointly with the Peninsula, but the case for change where we are.
Thank you, Libby. So I've got Sam, Graham and Phil. I don't know, Phil, was it on this point that you wanted to come in, or is it a different point? Okay, so let's move to Sam then, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And I just wanted to go back to a point that Peter made, that it's really important we do some work to get clinicians working together again, isn't there? Because it feels like we've taken a step back, and actually it's crucial people work together, because at the end of the day, I think everyone wants to see better health outcomes for our population in Devon. So for me, that's critical. The second bit is I'd just like to endorse Frank's point, and I'm not sure it comes through as strongly as it might in the paper, around the 10-year plan, and government policy is to move resources out of hospitals into neighbourhoods. And I think we need to recognise all of our hospitals will be smaller at the end of this process. And we need to think about how do we do that best in the context of cardiovascular disease. And then the third point is I'm just wondering about that timetable and how that links into the 26-27 planning round, and whether we might need some initial outputs earlier than the end of the 11-month process. And it might just be worth thinking about how does all of that fit together.
Okay, thanks. So before I ask Steve to respond to that, is it on this point, Phil?
Yeah. Thank you. So it may be obvious, and apologies if it is. So at the end of 11 months, do we have a case for change? Or do we have a case for change with some recommended proposals to consider? Because 11 months is a long time. Okay.
So, Steve, do you want to come in on Sam's point and Phil's point?
Yeah, on the microphone. Yeah, it's absolutely the latter. Phil, we can't spend 11 months developing the case for change. That needs to be done as rapidly, but as I mentioned, including all of those voices in it as carefully as it needs to be done. Yeah, Sam, we do need to give consideration to how this links into the planning round. My sense is it's going to be possible to do some of that. What we're intending for this year is, particularly on the back of having hopefully 3-year allocations, is we'll be able to set out a 3-year programme. To be realistic, year one may be about doing some shifts and building that neighbourhood team, particularly capability, bringing providers together from disparate backgrounds. Year two will probably be more specific about how some of those shifts happen. As I mentioned at previous meetings, we do, however, have the real benefit of learning from Cornwall, who are probably a year ahead of us on that timescale. So there may be some things that we can really motor on. I think the bit for me that we have to be careful about in developing our neighbourhood team capability is we need to allow people to come together, and that takes a bit of time. It's not so different from the cardiologists all coming together as well. So we need to think about how we engender that at speed, but with enough time for all those players to get on the pitch and then think about how that moves forward. But I'm hopeful that the Cornwall experience will help us to accelerate that.
Thanks, Steve. So with an eye on the time, I'm going to invite Graham and then Loper, and then I will ask Steve to make some concluding comments on this item.
Thank you.
Graham.
Yep. So, I mean, the case for change is an interesting halfway house, isn't it? Because it doesn't get you to the end destination. So I guess what I'd like to just make sure is that when we do have a proposal for change, I think there's two things that are going to be important in that. One is indeed the question that has already been discussed here about the sequence of things, because that shift to the left probably requires, as it were, double running, as it were, because the prevention, the manifestation of the impact of prevention will be seen sometime later, not immediately. And indeed, one could argue that often prevention is delay rather than prevention, because with an ageing population, with more chronic conditions, etc., you aren't going to get away with some sort of illness at some point. So I think we need to think really carefully about the short term, which is what's needed through a planning horizon of whatever it is, through to what's that longer term aspiration around prevention, and how long does that prevention actually change the model of the epidemiology? Because at some point probably you're going to see a rebound back again as an ageing population. So I think it's really important when we get to proposals that we understand the sequence of things. And my second point is around the resources, and I think Kay's already sort of picked up the value for money. I mean, NICE was set up to try and provide the best guidance it could on apples and apples rather than apples and pears in terms of quality of life impact. And I do think we need to understand what that means in the context of the inevitable dilemma we always have. You can't assume that money buys you anything that you want, because you can't. You need resources of the right skill set in the right place at the right time. So moving money isn't the issue alone, it's making sure we've got the right skill set. So I'd be really keen when we come back to this to understand the time sequence of things and how we've assessed the impact of this versus other things and how that maps to resources. So it's a reflection more than a question. Thanks.
Thanks for the reflection, Graham. Is there anything, Peter, Libby, you want to add to that? Okay, thanks very much. We note that, Graham. And then finally, Loper, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was, again, a reflection perhaps, but there's also a question in it. But it picks up on what Graham was saying around prevention. I think we need to articulate what good looks like for the case for change, but also what good looks like for CVD moving forward as part of the population health improvement. And the other thing as well is, we've talked a lot about looking at across Devon and looking at Cornwall, but I think we should also look at exemplars from elsewhere and build those in, and not even necessarily even in this country. I think we might want to look at it globally so that we take the best. And then the final observation is the third part of the Darcy shift is also analogue to digital, and I think that needs to be built in as a particular strand. Can it help in the delivery of diagnosis and things like that? So.
Thank you, Loper. So I'm going to move to Steve for the concluding remarks on this before we move to the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll pick up some of those points when I make the concluding remarks. I think there's some really important stuff in there. I guess where I would start, it was good to hear Alison saying we made a brave decision last time. I do think, though, we need to acknowledge that that there has been the creation of much concern amongst the public and our clinicians about the way it was done up until that moment. That is absolutely not the way that we want to work going forward. There are many things to worry about in this life, and we don't wish to be adding to that. We do, in all of this, need to be absolutely honest with our clinicians and the public. I think, as Sam's already said, that things do need to change in the NHS, but that this example, what's been outlined today, both in the short term but also in the longer term development of this strategy, and indeed for some of the children's services we're going to come on to, this is the way in which we want to work. We want to be really clear about what it is that, as the commissioners of services on behalf of the people we serve, what good looks like, and then we want to ask our experts, and the experts are the people who experience the service and the people who deliver the service, to help us work out a way from getting from where we are to where we need to be. And then once that's been done, we get our shoulder and indeed our significant resources behind that to make it happen. So this is, if you like, a microcosm of everything that will come out of the strategy and the ongoing strategic development process. But I do think we just need to acknowledge today that there has been a significant raising of concern simply because of the way the process has been done. I think the other point, just to pick up, is in all of this, the third voice that we do need to have in the room, alongside the people who experience our services and the people who deliver it, are those innovators and inspiring people from both around the country and indeed around the world. And my previous experience, and indeed Libby's previous experience of doing some of this work, has been that they really can create inspiring narratives for our clinicians to think entirely differently. And I think now more than ever, the NHS needs that kind of thinking in order to really crack some problems which everyone around this table, all of our providers are deeply frustrated with, and we need to start creating some answers to that. So, wouldn't want to be here, wouldn't want to have started by having to pull a paper at the last minute, but if this is a good example about now how we're going to work, then I think that it stands out as what the board should be expecting to see for all of our work going forward.
Thank you, Steve. So if we can move to the recommendations in the paper, where we are asked to endorse the process to develop a case for change. Is the board happy to endorse the process as outlined in the paper and as summarised just then by Steve? Okay, thank you. We endorse the process to develop a case for change, and we are asked to note the additional activity underway to be delivered in year. Okay, we note that. Thank you very much, and thanks for all of the contributions to that important part of the agenda. We move on now to item 4.5 of the agenda, which is it relates to 3 papers on children and young people services. Penny, I'm going to ask you to present all 3 papers, and then we will open up for questions after that. Thank you, Penny.
Okay, so thank you, Chair, for this. And actually, in developing this agenda item, initially we were going to bring one integrated paper. However, because of the complexity of the issues, it felt really important to consider them both in the round but also as separate items, because they attract different level of assurance. I will take the papers as read. I do, however, want to just make a few introductory remarks about the context in which we provide children and young people services. So it's a really complex statutory and regulatory context for Devon. And we have joint targeted area inspections, not subject to the papers today, but were an item at last board. So that's commonly called a JTI. And were provided positive assurance, and that's with Ofsted and CQC, and mainly child protection related. You then have the inspection of Devon local authority local authority services, and those are called ILACs commonly, and those were an Ofsted inspection. And the contribution of health, are those significant in terms of consequence? It's largely a local authority inspection. You then have SEND, and so that's special education needs and or disability. That's been discussed often around this table, and that's an Ofsted CQC inspection. And then you also have youth and justice inspections, which are conducted by Her Majesty Inspector of Probation. And that's in addition to the CQC focus within our tertiary, secondary and primary services. And the point I make here is that this is rounded largely through various statutory instruments, not all of them in full alignment, and also there's been very significant focus on things like Working Together 23, which now has invoked lead safeguarding partnerships, and there is forthcoming work on Family First. all of these regulatory inspections and also those work programmes have a suite of strategic, tactical and operational meetings which are pulled together in each local authority through a children's improvement board. And those children's improvement boards have various status. So the one for Devon County Council is currently chaired by a children's commissioner. The extent of those regulatory inspections show that we range from good to inadequate, and there is variation even in each local authority footprint. And the focus of those inspections do not remain consistent year in, year out. So without labouring the point, this is a really important element of our service delivery that hasn't actually been reflected, particularly in things like our National Oversight Framework for work, for example. But it's really important this board understands that, the importance of the work. So I'll go now in terms of the ILACs, and I'll turn to the first paper. So I'll take the paper as read, and there is helpful, I hope, introduction and background setting out the situation around Devon County Council being under commission. And there is a report going back to the Secretary of State at the beginning of September with the third Children's Commissioner's recommendations. And one of the options open to the Secretary of State is to place those children's services into a child's trust. That is something that we really are actively working as a visible and effective partner to try and support Devon County Council in their broader improvement plan, and hopefully avoid that because it does attract a level of additional bureaucracy in some ways, but it's really important that we're visible as an ICB board to that improvement. So part of that contribution is the health response to the ILAC inspection, and you'll see within the section 8 of the report that I give a summary of those findings. And I put deliberately an excerpt from the report because for me it's about this board being really being transparent about that children's experience in Devon remain poor, and for too many children serious weaknesses remain, leaving children at risk of harm. Now, there is much learning for all multi-agency partners, and so what we've done proactively, there is not yet a fully integrated improvement plan that's being worked up under the chair of the Children Commissioner, but even prior to the inspection, obviously, there's been work done around things like the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is, in children's term, the front door to accessing child protection support and arrangements. So we're not waiting to develop the health in part of that improvement plan. I'll give you an example of one of the things that we're doing. So I've commissioned a review of the health component of the multi-agency hub, MASH in other terms, and making sure that there is sufficient capacity, but also lean and effective, productive ways of working. And then working with providers to make sure that there is a prioritised approach to staffing those the MASH hubs, because we do all of this work in the context of there being no more money, no further money. What we need to do is make sure that we're getting the best productivity and value out of the spend that we've got. So that is subject to work, and I've been working with the chief execs and the CNOs particularly around the hub. So I could talk a long time around this, so I will try and manage this, but I do feel it deserves the airtime. So I would draw your attention, however, to my recommendation to board that we take a satisfactory assurance at this time around the health component of the improvement plan. So the fact that we have developed the plan, that plan is coming to the executive committee in greater detail in August 5th for further check and challenge, and that plan will then inform the multi-agency plan. I don't want to wait on that broader piece before bringing it to this board, and hence it's here. Okay, so I'll move on to the next paper. So now I'm going to talk about the Torbay local authority footprint or area send inspection. So again, a sobering read, and the opening remarks in the paper, and I am going to go to that, Chair. It talks about too many children and young people with SEND wait unacceptable times to have their needs accurately identified, assessed and met. The experiences of children and young people with SEND in Torbay depends on who they meet along the journey. It was interesting, Steve, wasn't it, when we had the feedback from the regulators that actually some children get a really exceptional experience, but it depends on whether or not they're in a special educational environment, for example, or if they've managed to get through the health waiting list. So that is unacceptable, and there has been significant work, which I will talk about in the third paper relating to the autism neurodiversity waiting list. But that is unacceptable, and those waits aren't just down to health, but there is something about how we work together as a multi-agency partnership. So the breadth of the children's health contribution is around CAMS waiting lists, speech and language waiting lists, neurodiversity waiting list, and that we shouldn't just consider it as an autism neurodiversity piece. We've had impressive presentation here, recognising that if children don't get those interventions early, then actually the impact of developmental delay on their developmental delay is significant. So I think what I took from the feedback was they could understand and recognise that health have developed a strategy. That what's a theme in a lot of the both reports is the fact that we've got greater visible partnership working, the relationships are improving, that some of those foundation pieces are essential, but it's almost too little too late. And bearing in mind the last SEND inspection was 4 years ago, the gains we've made in the last year are good, but they're not sufficient to move us out of inadequate. I'm at the end, Lincoln. I know I do all three papers, but really you're around that table all the time, so I might invite you in. In a similar way, I've recommended to the board that we take satisfactory assurance on our approach to the remedial action plan. There is an important but nuanced difference between assurance is that action plan working? But the recommendation at this point is satisfactory assurance regarding the revised and improved action plan in health, significantly in health, but that's yet to again contribute to the multi-agency one that will be overseen by the Torbay Improvement Board. So I'll take a breath and move into the autism waiting list. And I take a breath because I really want to recognise the fact that this paper has papers on this have previously come to board. We recognised and assigned a level of sort of this one metric, driving down the 52-week wait autism waiting list would attract the same status as the NOF4 measures. And I would say that we haven't achieved the ambition to reduce the waiting list. What we have done is kept pace with a 39% increase in referrals in the Children Family Health Devon footprint, that we have managed the tip-ins, so to speak. By that I mean people tipping into the 52-week wait. And there has been work that meant we went fairly early on implementing commissioning levers. So even before the national direction of us acting more as a strategic commissioner, we issued a contract performance notice, for example. We've had a rapid improvement plan. And we've been working simultaneously in an innovation space, which is to say we can keep trying to do performance manage over the traditional model, but that's only going to get us so far. So what's the alternative? And that innovation space has been led by myself and chief execs and executives, actually seeing that senior leadership engagement into the alternative early intervention model has been key. But it would be the definition of madness to try and keep doing the things that we know aren't working. But we have to, in the interim, max out the opportunities within that traditional model whilst we rapidly look to implement the innovative one. And I do look to Lincoln once again. So the innovative model is very much based on wraparound education. The work we have done, of course, also those in the traditional model is the helping people wait in the interim. But we have seen a massive increase in referrals from education within the Torbay footprint, which tells me that people within education, children need to be in education. So many of these children are then excluded from school because of behaviour. So the more we can wrap around education, keep children in education and help those educators support is really important. So if I could have given you a limited plus assurance level, so this isn't an assurance level on the plan, this is an assurance level on the impact of the plan. It's limited. Yes, we've got a lot of underpinning work, and the approach we're now taking is much more, Kate, through a value for money piece, working with, hopefully, with Kirsty and her team and providers, is to really understand the full extent of the children's pound wrapped up in block contract. What are we spending as a total on children, and how can we repurpose that to those most high priority pieces? So I think that's a different and revised approach. So I'll pause there and take questions.
Thank you, Penny. That's really, really helpful summary of all three papers. I'd like us, as we open up to questions from the board, I would particularly like us to focus on those recommendations on assurance levels, because I think that's what it would be really good to ensure that we are behind those assurance ratings before we close this item. But before I open it up to the board, can we take the question which has been submitted by the MP for Torbay, please, Philippa?
Yes. So with regard in particular to the Torbay, Ofsted and CQC area special education needs and disabilities outcome, why did no representative from Devon ICB attend the continuous improvement meeting for young people in Torbay on 14th of July?
Yeah.
So, Penny, would you be able to take that? Thank you.
And I want to extend apologies for there not being an ICB representative. There was an exceptionally urgent internal operational priority that came up that day that had to be dealt with in relation to some of our cluster work, and it had to be dealt with that day. We gave our apologies, and there's an extraordinary meeting being set up this evening, actually, or 4 o'clock today, that both myself and Hannah Pugliese are attending. It was difficult. There were 2 papers for health, and it's not something that we would have wanted to ever do, and we've got a very good record of attendance to date, and it's not something that will happen going forward.
Thanks for that explanation, Penny. So let's open up to questions from board members, and Lincoln, I think, first. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I wanted to just begin by acknowledging the leadership and the partnership work from the ICB through Penny, Hannah, Sue and others, because it has really made a difference. The report does stress, and this is talking about the SEND report in Torbay, that the progress that has been made. And I think one of the things I've learned in this is the inspection is about the impact. So they do recognize that there's a lot of foundational activity, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do, but actually when it comes down to it, it is this making a difference for children their carers, their families. And I think that's where we fail. And you get a lot of that when you talk to them. And sometimes what they're asking for isn't that unusual. Yeah? And that comes back to some of the innovation that we need to do. A lot of the diagnosis is linked to perception or reality that you need a label for the system to respond to you. Yeah? And we're doing a lot of work through the graduated response and otherwise to build confidence. And I understand that Wiltshire, in a similar NHS situation with intractable waiting lists, has had a more favorable outcome because they've been able to demonstrate consistent support that is based on need, presenting need, as opposed to final diagnosis, if you see what I mean. So I think that mind shift gives us a way forward, and I think there's enough in the report in the wording that we do not necessarily have to crack, because I don't see how we do that in the current trajectory. Yeah? And your third paper on the pathways makes that quite clear. So that managing the waiting lists is going to be important in terms of how we support people while they're waiting. It's important as well that as we read those papers, there are some other things beyond the neurodiversity, the speech and language. Those are important, but actually the message here is across the board for all services that we deliver for children and families with SEN. So it's important, it's just as important that when they go to accident and emergency, that we're making the reasonable adjustments for families who have autistic children, for example. Yeah. So this is a message for the whole system. And again, thanks, Penny, for the nuance, because when I read it initially, I thought actually the board can't take satisfactory assurance here. There is too much. The detail isn't there. But I will accept that there is a mechanism. You are engaging in developing that plan. I think we're having some frank discussions about how do we do a plan that is realistic, that doesn't give us a false security, given that it is 18 months that we're going to need to be accountable for making some real tangible impacts this time around. Thanks.
Thank you, Lincoln. That's helpful. Do you want to respond to that, Penny?
Thank you, Lincoln. And actually, we've managed to recruit the lead from BSW of Wiltshire, who led some of that work. So one of the things is making sure that we've got sufficient capacity in our team, but also that forward thinking and learning from the best of others. I really believe that by making this everybody's business, so hence that my point actually, we may pursue the pound in all of our contracts, but in doing so, we are then raising the roar really for this across all of our health provision. And I do think there's still further to go, Lincoln, on how we engage in education, with education, for example. So all of us have got a part to play in this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. And Frank, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Penny for the work that her team have done on this, which is incredibly difficult, and trying to service 3 different authorities is a major issue going forward, and I'll come on to that later. I have a particular professional and personal interest in all of this stuff. Personally, I've already said I've got 5 adopted children. 2 of them had EHCPs throughout their childhood. I am the lead doctor for a private school. I've done it on 2 separate occasions, and a total of 13 years of that. I go into our state school on a fortnightly basis to their welfare meeting, and I can report that 3.8% of their population this year have gone electively home educated, a lot of it related to this sort of issue. And within the practice, because people know of my background, they hunt me out to help them with all the SEND issues. The ultimate prevention is to get it right for children. And we, at this point, are doing what we can, but my question would probably be, how do we prioritise that going forward? And how do we get the governance of it right going forward in a smaller ICB? So the police, the local authority and health are all equally responsible. The police cover Devon and Cornwall. I do not believe the smaller ICB is going to be able to attempt to cover 3 different authorities doing things in 3 different ways going forward. And I also think there would be benefits for the authorities in looking at how others do it, because some of them are managing to deliver better. Now, I know we can't change how the authorities are set up at this point in time, but I suppose the real issue is, if we are going to prioritise this, what does the team need to be in the smaller ICB, and also what governance structure can that smaller team actually work with to deliver what we need to deliver?
Thanks, Frank. Steve?
Yeah, again, Frank's some really good points. I think the only thing I would observe is I think there is imminent national guidance about the future responsibilities of ICBs in the new arrangements for send and safeguarding. I don't think they've come out yet, but we are expecting them shortly. I'm not sure that will entirely answer your questions, but it will at least give some clarity about where roles and functions are. At the moment, our working hypothesis is that we carry on doing everything, and your point's very well made. On a cluster arrangement, there will be 5 local authorities, including the Isles of Scilly. The level of complexity becomes almost boggling. So I'm putting some store and some hope by that guidance, which will help us work through how we're going to do that practically on the ground.
Thanks, Steve. So, sorry, Penny.
It's a point I feel really well made, because some of the learning coming out of the Torbay work, actually proactively, the Chief Exec of the Torbay Local Authority, Anne-Marie Bond, had conducted a governance review. Because you have these operational, tactical and strategic meetings, there's quite a lot of discussion, but it's quite hard to get to the nub of the action and the impact required. And that was so there will be some really positive work coming out of that. The other issue is who has the locus of control to make the change in health that is required, so that further involvement of health providers, rather than the ICB doing all of the PR and collecting the actions, without a mechanism of contract oversight, it's really hard to disperse that into the provider. So I think that will really help us going forward.
Thank you, Penny. So I've got Salma, Kate and Graham, and then I think we'll need to move to the recommendations after that. So over to you first, Salma.
Thanks, Chair. I'm conscious of time also, so I'll just focus on the areas that others haven't already covered. I think my first point is thanks very much, Penny, for setting out what is a really complex set of issues. I don't know anywhere that isn't facing the same or similar types of issues. This is kind of a national challenge, but of course today we're here to focus on Devon, so I'll just make my point specific to Devon. I think the first point is I completely accept that this is a inspection that is a local authority inspection, but of course it identifies areas including those around multi-agency working. So I think my first point is the experience of children collectively is poor, and children and young people won't differentiate between the different components and the different authorities. So we've got to kind of focus on the experience of children as the primary locus of attention. That then leads me on to, for example, the MASH, which is a perfect example of where we're having to do things together. And I think it's clearer and easier to tackle the things that are the sole responsibility of health for us, the sole responsibility for local authorities of others. But it's at the interfaces where most things go wrong. And this is usually where children fall between the two stools. And so from an interface point of view, it would be really helpful to understand in more detail what the specific issues around MASH working are. Some of them are set out in the report, but they're set out in such a high-level way that it's quite difficult to then understand what the appropriate mitigations are going to be. And then, obviously, to see the mitigations in a smart action plan would, I think, provide the board with a greater degree of assurance than I think it's currently able to take. So I think that then takes me on to the point of how do we get this right for children, young people and their families, as well as for communities, actually. And I think I absolutely would agree with you that local ownership of getting this right for local children in Devon is the right approach and the first approach. But this is the third commission, and this has been going on for a long period of time. And I think the focus needs to be on getting it right rather than the institution or the organisation that is going to help sort this out. And other areas where they've had children trusts have been able to leverage improvement that perhaps organisations aren't able to do because the Children's Trust have a set of resources and other oversight, etc., that may lend to helping sort this problem out. Ultimately, the problem will, whether it's a Children's Trust or other, it'll remain within Devon to sort. But I kind of don't want to throw out that as an option to be avoided at all cost unless we think that hinders rather than supports. So that would be my issue around that. So in terms of assurance, and Kevin's point, I think really helpful that you were able to set out what the assurance is based on. I personally feel at the moment that once we have a more detailed assessment of what the particular challenges are, and that we have sight of a robust mitigation plan, that we are in a better position to take full assurance. That would be my view. I think moving on to the second paper, I think the parallels. I don't think I need to kind of repeat the same thing again. I think in terms of the targeted inspection, yes, of course, it's focusing on SEND, but actually the issues and the actions again will kind of have similar parallels to it. So I think the issue there, of course, is about trying to understand where in that multi-agency pathway the problems are presenting, and that, again, the same thing around. So what's the right way of trying to deal with this? And I think in the last paper around the management of the waiting list, I think it's really good. We're grappling with all the issues that everybody's grappling with everywhere. The only thing that I'd want to add to that is it would be really helpful to understand what processes we have in place to identify children who are on those lists for a long period of time, to identify any potential risk around the deterioration of those children and the impact on their families, so we can reprioritise if that's the appropriate way of doing things. Because you said, kids dip in, they dip out. You know, there's all sorts of agencies dealing with fragments of their care. So how do we collect intelligence and insight in such a way that we actually can keep an eye on what's happening on that waiting list, because the time periods are so long? So those would be my main comments, Chair.
Thanks, Salma. So was I hearing, Salma, that you feel that we're not yet in a position to take satisfactory assurance from the first and second papers? Yeah, so we perhaps just in response to that, we might just want to think about how we might get to that level of satisfactory assurance, perhaps using the Quality and Patient Experience Committee as a way to do that. So Penny, if you want to respond, and then perhaps Tandy as chair of that committee to respond to Salma's points.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say exactly that, but I think it looks like there's quite a detailed level of discussion that we need to do, and I think that maybe it would have been better if we'd had deep dives in QPEC before coming here. So I think I would suggest that we take some of this back to QPEC and then we come back here in the board in terms of checking whether the level of assurance is good enough or not. But I think we need a deeper debate, especially to be sure about whether what we're doing is actually transformative enough, because some of these issues have been there for quite a long time.
So Penny, the suggestion is that we don't approve these assurance ratings today, but take these papers into QPEC for some further work. Does that create a problem for you if we do that, or is that a way forward for us?
I'd invite Philippa to comment from a governance perspective, but I would welcome that further inquiry, and to be, that's not a problem, and that would have been my suggestion if we couldn't have agreed it today.
Okay, so from a governance perspective, Philippa.
Yeah, I think I would recommend to the board that the board reflects in its resolution the limited assurance that it has currently in the performance in this area, and that it's remitting to the Quality and Performance Quality Patient Experience Committee the review of the review of the action plans in detail to take further assurance and bring back to the next meeting of the board.
Okay, thank you. Let's take that as an action, but we just have a couple of other questions. Then we will need to move on to the third question from our MP here today, and then we'll ask Steve to just do a summary of where we've got to.
Chair, is it helpful for me to come back just on the other 2 points that's up?
Of course, yes. Sorry.
So I think that synergistic working around multi-agency and statutory partnerships is when we really start to motor. And I think that issue around avoiding the "we can't do this because you're not doing that" type piece is unhelpful. And where we've really strengthened the voice of health is to be able to have mutual check and challenge. So up until, I would say, about the last 18 months, we've spent a lot of time in multi-agency arrangements introducing variation because of the different needs. We really needed to consolidate the health offer into those partnerships with that's evidence-based, consistent practice. And so hence you may have heard more of a health focus in my presentation, but it was something about that. What I have commissioned is or asked the team to do is a thematic analysis of all of our inspections, and you know that again could come to QPEC under identifying the underpinning themes, because for me we have a one plan for children and young people in Devon, and that should feed all of the assurance, and the regulatory achievements should come out of our good practice, not the other way around. But that's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Final couple of points from Kay and Graham. Kay.
Thanks, Chair. So very, very quickly, just some reflections on the neurodiversity waiting list and some comments, really. I was wondering if we can learn from the approaches we take in managing within an acute setting, whether that is at all applicable to this sort of work. I was thinking things like data improvement, demand and capacity planning, referral protocols, quality of referrals, outcome assessments, improvement methodologies. So maybe we could pick that up in the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, but whether we can take some learning.
Yes. So when we set the initial ambition, it was very much a case of will we apply the usual approach to driving down a waiting list? Yeah. Then you realise the waiting lists are held in different places and so forth. So there has been this year a data quality improvement plan as part of the, I think it was outside of the CPN, but a really key part. And of course, where there's difficulty in capturing those data, then that sort of implies it's being done on different pathways as well. So there's quite a lot of work just understanding. But yes, all of those things have been a component part. They've got us so far, but we do need to revise the pathway. Yeah.
Thanks, Kay. Thanks, Penny. And finally, Graham.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's no comfort, I know, but we are not unique here, and I think Salma, you already pointed that out. It's a national picture, and it's not a new issue, but it's been growing and changing. So I think we will all recognise that. I guess my fundamental question is, given the overlay of that national picture, have we really done the root cause analysis on some of these aspects, without which I think it's quite hard to know whether our actions are really appropriate or not? So, for example, I only pick one out. It talks about domestic abuse. Well, we're going to look at the numbers. Well, when you've done that, it leaves the so what, doesn't it? So I take the nuance that you're driving between the outturn and the process. But for me, I think if QPEC looks at this, I would urge trying to do the root cause of it, which I think will be really quite complicated. And I suspect there's something we need to really consider about culture, motivation, incentives, the leadership, etc., which underpin this. Without addressing those, I think we're always going to be struggling, frankly. So, thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Do you want to respond to that, Penny?
I sometimes talk about things having a long tail and actually really understanding, almost using a 5 reasons why, and actually absolutely getting to the nub of the issues. And I think that it's so multifactorial. So one of the things I would want the board to know is that the waiting list for autism and neurodiversity does not attract the EDF, so it's not part of the elective recovery programme. So there's a disadvantage for children. It wasn't enough. There's a disadvantage for children. So there's lots of different moving parts. Phil, I and Joe Teep have been working, for example, on unifying and simplifying the leadership structure, because without good leadership, we're stuck. So making sure, when I was training back, so what's the role of the CNO in this and so forth. So really going back to core principles of accountability. But yes, that 5 reasons why, I think, is a piece of work actually we could formalise.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Penny. Steve, final comments on this before we move to the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. Again, a really good discussion on a whole range of issues. I have to say I've been on a massive learning curve with all of this because it's a really complicated subject, and the amount of types of regulatory impact, the fact that it is fundamentally multi-agency working across a wide range of agencies, and I would just reiterate the significant leadership that Penny has brought to that. I think your reflection, Kay, that we ought to use some of the discipline from elective, but also maybe whilst the situations are different and the needs are different, there are some analogues for how you might be able to deal with what is fundamentally, in terms of waiting times at least, a mismatch between demand and workforce. How has that been solved in other areas like physio and those sorts of things? Yeah, digital will be a key part of that. So I think there are things I think we should reflect on that. I think there's a couple of things. The first thing I would say is I think over the course of the last year we've seen this come, despite the fact it's not in NOV, this has come much more into the board's consciousness. Arguably, should have always been there, but I think particularly again through Penny's leadership, we're now really clear that we've got a whole range of issues. There's some parallels with the previous paper around cardiology. We've got a short-term significant issue, which is the unacceptable waiting times for ND, for CAMS and for speech and language therapy. And we're working through a process, as Penny's described, of we need to go faster on those things. Those are in-year urgent issues, and I've met with the Children and Family Health Devon, with Penny, to spell out that we aren't going fast enough in those areas. I think the wider piece of work, again, similar to the cardiology thing, is how do we create a service which really is different from the one that we have. And again, recognising this is a multi-agency space we're in, unlike some of our other areas, which makes it that much more complicated. We need to find better ways of working with children and families to see what they need, and then for the statutory services to provide for those needs. And that's something we need to start spelling out about how we're going to make that journey. So we shift from a focus on what might be, in some cases, described as problem containment into really solving problems for children and their families. And we're part of that, but we're not all of it. On the demand and capacity planning, if you wanted to pop into my office and see my whiteboard, Penny and I have been doing a lot of algebra about how we do that, because that is a really important part of this. Part of the reason we've got where we have is because there is a significant mismatch. What we need to understand is if we carry on going the way we're going, and I think you said definition of madness, how big would that problem become? Because that's our baseline. And then we need to move into the innovation space of, like, well, we're not going to have the time to do that, we won't have the workforce to do that, or probably the infrastructure. Where can we learn from the very best who've solved this and create a different response that deals with that demand in a way which isn't traditional waiting list reduction? That work needs to go on alongside this. I'm really keen, and Penny's really supportive of this, that we get this into our strategy and our strategic commissioning intentions. So even if we can't solve it all next year, we need to be setting out direction of travel and what expectations we have as commissioners from our providers over the next 3 years, whilst getting on, as I say, with that short-term urgent piece of work is people are just waiting, children are waiting too long for a whole range of our services.
Thank you, Steve. If we move to the recommendations, I think where we've got to with this is that we are noting the 3 reports, but we're deferring a decision on assurance levels pending some deeper dive work at the Quality and Patient Experience Subcommittee of the Board, and we'll then bring it back into a board meeting in the autumn after that piece of work has been completed. Are we happy with that as an approach following these papers? Thank you. We have a third question from the Member of Parliament for Torbay, which covers both of the issues which we've done so far in this segment of the meeting. So, Philippa, can I ask you to bring that question, and then we will respond.
And I think it's worth noting it also covers other items on the agenda for this meeting as well, which we've already considered in terms of the annual plan, but also and haven't yet to consider in terms of the finance report. But essentially, the question is, what consideration does the board take of place shaping and the impact on local economies of health activities, not just immediate costs and clinical outcomes, i.e., a more holistic approach?
Thanks, Philippa, and I'll invite Steve to respond to that question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, another really good question. And I think there's probably, for me, there are 2 elements to this question. The first, and we referred to it a couple of times today, is the importance of developing our place shaping through the way in which we want to support the development of integrated neighbourhood teams. Clearly a really strong signal in the NHS 10-year plan, and it's going to be a key part, as the board's aware, through the work we've done in workshops of our strategy, which is coming to board. That's important because in defining those places and bringing together a whole range of people who can help to support those local communities, and we can make a real difference to people's health. I think the second bit, which is something we need to really think about doing much more work on, is we spend a vast amount of money in the NHS locally, about £3 billion. How do we use that money as I mean, it's sometimes foundational economy or it's anchor institution, but how do we use that as much as an economic and public health tool for the local population? So some of that is about how we look at the way in which we recruit people into the NHS. These are good jobs with good pensions, good processes, but quite often for some of our most deprived communities, they are not easy to get into for a whole range of reasons. I'm keen to ensure that whatever happens going forward, we're not just the commissioners of stuff, we're also the commissioners of providers who are keen and able and wish to support their local population in that regard. The second part of that is around prevention, a key public health element here, and that for me links very strongly to health and to reducing inequalities more generally, and in doing those things, being able to help people to get into work, to stay in work, and to support them, and of course that links to a whole range of issues, not least reducing waiting times for planned care and ensuring that we do start to spend more of the health pound in helping people to stay well and avoid illness. Clearly there's a space in this as well for the wider determinants of health, which we work through our integrated care partnership, and we need to think about what the future of that will be. But we need to be playing a full part in how we work, particularly with local authorities, around those wider issues like housing, like economy, like leisure and so on. So I see that being a really important part of the future for the ICB, because we do leverage an awful lot of money, and we can do that to the good of our local population.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks to Steve Darling for the 3 questions which have been submitted today. I'm still very keen to finish the meeting at 1:30 today, just because of other things that are happening after the meeting. So the remainder of the meeting on the governance and assurance reports and the other committee chair reports. I think we need to be very focused now to try and achieve that 1:30 closure of the meeting. So item 5.1 is on the board assurance framework. I'll ask Philippa to take us into that item, please.
Thank you. I think it's worth reflecting on the board assurance framework that is being presented to the board at this meeting as an interim report. The report sets out that, as agreed at the last meeting of the board, we are using the old version of the NOF, the themes that are in there, to set our strategic risks. This is in line with the approach that we took previously, and whilst we work through the development of our health and care strategy, and as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, as part of the development of the health and care strategy and the articulation of objectives within that, we will be articulating proposed risks to those objectives to be brought to the board for agreement at its meeting in September. So it's an interim report, I think is the best way of thinking about it. However, the report does add on 2 additional risks that were agreed at the last board meeting, specifically in relation to the clustering arrangements that are being proposed. So these relate to essentially maintaining a focus on delivering business as usual, and also making sure that we do everything that we need to in terms of reducing the ICB running costs. I think has already been travelled at the beginning of this meeting. The work around the reduction of ICB running costs and clustering, there is so much change and so much work in this space that I don't think the risk as it's the mitigations to the risk as they're currently articulated fully reference all the work that's being done in relation to this. So I think that there will be a further opportunity to provide that update in advance of the next board meeting. I think those are the key points that I wanted to bring out of this report, other than to flag that you'll see when looking at the table on page, under paragraph 13 on page 7 of the report, that there has been, it's not indicated in the report, but there has been a movement in the risk ratings in relation to these risks following consideration at various committee meetings. So, for example, previously the finance and use of resources risk, I think, was coming out at a 12 as a result of the Finance and Performance Committee's consideration. That has been increased to a 16. And I think you'll see that there are additional risks in relation to ratings of risk in relation to leadership and capability, and the 2 additional risks that are there as a very highly rated risk, because we're still working through how to address those.
Thank you, Philippa. Are there any questions for Philippa? Salma.
Chair, just a very quick comment. I note it's an interim report, so it was just for consideration. Just bearing in mind some of the conversations we've had about population health improvement, I just wonder whether the risk appetite around that particular one could be revised, and because to something more closer to open or hungry. Because I think this is where innovation is going to be really important, and I think we're not going to be able to crack this one by kind of trying to contain it in the way that perhaps we might other areas of risk. So it was just one to put out there, not necessarily for a response today.
Yeah, it's a good observation, Salma. Philippa, do you want to respond to that?
I think a really helpful comment, and I think as we think about the further iteration of the BAF, we absolutely need to be thinking about proposed risk appetites in relation to that, so we can take that into that work.
Okay, thank you. And Kay, please.
Just a very quick one. So just want to clarify the timing of the medium-term financial plan. So I know there was a conversation with the regional ask of it being September, but that was before nationally we now understand what the medium-term financial planning is more likely to look like, leading to a sort of a December submission. I don't know if we're doing one in September and one in December, or we might not yet know that.
Kirsty, would you like to take that?
Yeah, so we've had a debate on this, so we will be doing a medium-term financial plan for the end of September as part of the NOF4 exit. Okay. But the detail for the October, November, December, which is at organisational level, will be in line with the second phase. Okay. But we need a system one for the end of September.
Thanks, Kirsty. Okay, if there are no other questions on the board assurance framework, is the board happy to approve the content of the latest iteration of the 25-26 BAF risks to achieving the strategic objectives of NHS Devon? Thank you. The board approves that. Let's move on to 5.2 and the quality report. Penny.
I will take the report as read, and also, in addition to my summary report, there's an extensive quality report with the detail for board members to read as required. So this report relates largely to data that was produced in Q1. Always nice to have an audience. So I would take you first of all to the item on safety and our previous discussion around the improvements in urgent and emergency care. What we know is that patients who wait too long, there can be risk, and it is risk to patient safety, both in the here and now, but also in terms of prognosis. So there's been work to implement the SWOS timely handover process, and of course we've already spoken about the improvement in the last 5 to 6 weeks. So that's really good to hear from a quality perspective. Cardiology has been subject to separate discussion, and RTT, I think any questions related to that we should take to John Finn in the QPEC. I suppose rather than go through each item separately, what I would like to point to are the developing approaches we're taking around patient experience. That links very closely with the work of Penny Dash around mainstreaming patient experience measures at point of delivery. We've strengthened the links between things like patient complaints and how that informs the work within the ICB as well, an example being around increasing capacity for audiology and dental. Also, to really point, actually, and of course I do use every opportunity to talk about equality, quality impact assessments. So we have now addressed our process, and it largely aligned with the newly issued national guidelines, and we had some check and challenge in week about our use of that, and that's going to be subject to an internal audit. And I will just give you some warning, Peter, I will come to you about mortality if that's okay. One key item that has taken place since production of this report is that we held a peninsula-wide local maternity neonatal system meeting. We were already looking to have a joined-up arrangement prior to the opportunities around clustering, but we've pushed on with that, and we hope it will demonstrate some of the benefits of working over a bigger footprint. The report, the quality report, this is the last time you'll see it in this version. It's been refined to have more run charts and SPCs, so we understand things over time and less narrative, but you will still have depth. I think in all when things are so unstable, it's so easy to lose sight of quality, so I make no apology for bringing detail into this space. I'll pause and take questions.
So before we open up for questions, I'm going to just ask Tandy to present the report as chair of the Quality Patient Experience Committee, and then we'll open up for any questions and observations.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be a bit brief. So this was a meeting in June. We looked at a number of items. First one was the patient choice and the process in Devon. So we looked at that report, and the committee was of the opinion that we need some further clarification on the interaction of patient choice and contract management within Devon, as well as how that interacts with the operational plan. So that needs to come back to the committee next time. We also looked at the EQ EQIA, and I think here I need to commend Penny again about how much this work on EQIAs has moved on since we started working on it. Obviously, there's still some work to be done to it, but today we have, to date, we've trained about 200 people, and the leadership around EQIAs is continuing, and the engagement with it is really good as well. The committee also thought this is a good candidate for cross-committee conversations, so we're sort of looking to have further conversations with the Finance and Performance Committee on EQIA just to see where the overlaps are and have sight of that from the two perspectives. We looked at the delivery management process, which Libby has just reported to you, and we're quite satisfied with what's going on in there. We looked at the quality management handbook. This is about how Devon is actually sort of delivering on this and to meet its statutory requirements. Again, we're satisfied with what was in the handbook, as well as noting the changes in that. So the decisions there was to have satisfactory assurance on the quality report that Penny has just reported, and I think that's probably all you need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tandy. So let's open up for questions to Penny and Tandy. Lopa, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got two questions. One is on the quality report. I like the detail and the depth, and anything to improve the narrative is very welcome. So well done on that. On page 360, it's the chart, which I found very interesting. And what I wanted to ask is, incidents over the past year, unknown, or I don't know, is quite high. So it's kind of an outlier statistics. Yes. And I just wondered if we could
do more.
Well, just understand
who's in other.
Yeah. Why is that? Because that's unusual. And then the other question, the orange line, I presume, is just the cumulative. I've assumed that. Okay. And then the other question I had was UHP, the 7 never events in 1 year.
Yes.
Wow. Were they related to any specific one area, one person, one team? Because again, I just wanted to understand the statistics. Is it dispersed or is it concentrated? Yeah, please.
So the dreaded other. Yes. So we work with our providers to try and reduce the amount that go into other. It is somewhat now, Lopa, out of our local discretion, because this national learning from patient safety incident piece is a nationally driven piece. We don't have full insight into we used to get a full listing of all incidents, so you could delve into it and go, well, that's a coding issue. You might want to do this and that. So we will take that, and I won't give you more of a response other than we'll take it to our patient safety forum. And I'll come back with a response to you.
Just come back to say that then that represents a risk, because that is the thing that we're not measuring correctly. So just to note that.
Yeah, fair point. Thanks, thanks, Lopa.
The action on that, though, is I will bring a position back from our patient safety forum into QPEC, because it will be in hand. In terms of never events, the classification of never events is very limited. And so they relate to things like application of the World Health Organization safety checklist, for example. What we do know in Plymouth is that they've got a really good reporting culture, and it's part of their quality governance arrangements. And they have actually been working across Devon and outside of Devon to look at those issues arising. I can give a full listing of those 7 to illustrate that further. But for example, they should be never events. So things like operating on the wrong site, leaving a swab in situ, for example. But it does pick up. They do record their near misses as their never events. So that positive reporting culture means that they don't always have impact on the patient. So they've been spotted in advance. I don't know if, Peter, you'd want to say anything.
Thanks, Penny. And I was privileged to chair one of the system quality groups on your behalf, and we actually discussed this issue to look for whether there was any thematic analysis to those 7 never events. So did they all happen in the same place? Were they all about the same thing? And there wasn't. I don't think that should move away from the focus, particularly on things like the WHO checklist, which are the things that keep patients safe. But I think Penny makes a really important point around the impact. So often these are so the report has to happen even if it's been discovered before the outcome would have manifested, if that makes sense. So recognize it in a way it describes something that is positive, because it is people have discovered a never event was about to happen and stopped it happening and stopped the impact on the patient.
I am aware of time, but Lopa, the other thing, and we can walk you through this because it's a really important measure as services get busier, the human factor element. So never events are an important, rarely occurring event, but an important marker. But in elsewhere in the southwest, I've known examples where people argue, is it a never event, isn't it a never event? Put the energy into whether or not it meets the categorisation. I would say Plymouth have got a very open and positive reporting culture.
Thanks, Penny. So I'm going to move to Kay, and then we'll have to move on to the next item if we're going to try and finish for 1:30. Kay.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. So thank you, Penny. I'd like to pick up UHP's shimmy and the coding issue. And what I don't understand is the coding improving, but there's a time delay in the shimmy catching up? Because my concern is, of course, that we might have a mortality problem that is actually a code. Is it coding or is it a problem or not?
Yes, so thanks, Kay, for a really helpful question. So you'll be aware, and the board will be aware, that we've focused on the shimmy and it being an outlying position for a number of months. There is coding is often identified as a contributing factor, and as you say, there is a lag. So the way that the shimmy is calculated means that there can be up to a 12-month delay before you would see improvements come into the shimmy position. Having said that, we, in collaboration with our regional colleagues, have recognised that we probably are at a stage now where we haven't seen the improvement that we would have expected, and that we are taking further steps in collaboration with colleagues at UHP to do some further deep diving into making sure that they are focused on the right things and delivering the impact that we'd expect.
Okay, thank you. So we're asked to take satisfactory assurance from the contents of the quality report, and a note that satisfactory focus and actions in place to mitigate risks and support improvements in relation to quality. Is the board happy to take satisfactory assurance? And on the report from the committee chair, asked to take assurance from the chair's report of the meeting of the Quality and Patient Experience Committee of the 12th of June 2025, and we are noting the recommendation that EQIAs would be an appropriate area of work to be considered by a joint committee of the Finance and Performance Committee and the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. So I'll ask the chairs of those two committees to take that forward. Is the board happy with those recommendations? Okay, we will now move on to the finance report. Again, I'm going to plead for pace on the presentation of this, please. So over to Kirsty, and then we'll take the two reports from the Chair of the Finance Performance Committee before opening it up for questions. Kirsty, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is month 2. This is a report that includes both the ICB and the system financial positions. I will take it as read, and detailed reports have gone to the Finance and Performance Committee, both for the ICB and for the ICS. It is limited assurance for both, predominantly due to the high level of risk still in the plans and the efficiencies not being fully identified. We do have a new assurance process in place, which we've discussed as part of the delivery management outcome report. This does have a set of CLOEs. It has trigger points, and those trigger points trigger specific actions and escalations, and I can confirm that those actions and escalations have been taken and followed up. I've had one-to-ones with all of the CFOs and agreed clear actions on recovery, which will be monitored from month 4. Those monthly meetings are now in place, and the region will also be participating in those meetings from month 4 as well. Every organisation has had a deep dive on their SIP plans by the region and by the with the ICB in attendance. For DPT, it was led by the ICB with the region in attendance, and the ICB itself has had one, and that had a provider in attendance as well. So we've all had everything done equally and fairly to all of the organisations. The reports from those will be going to the Finance Performance Committee. They've already seen RDUH, about to see the management response to TSD. The UHP one is in draft. The DPT one and ICB ones have only just been recently completed, so the reports are not available, but they will go through to the Finance Performance Committee for scrutiny going forward. Just one other update as well is nationally there's a new process to determine how the deficit support funding is released. So it was a bit complicated at the beginning of the year because that process has not been defined. That's now been agreed, and we have gone through that process, and we have received retrospectively our Q1 deficit support funding, and prospectively we've also received Q2 deficit support funding. I'll leave it there, but I think the recommendation is to acknowledge that there's limited assurance because of the risks.
Thank you, Kirsty. So before we open it up for any comments, over to Kay for the chair reports of the Finance and Performance Committee for the 12th of June and 10th of July. Thanks, Kay.
Thanks, Kevin. So for brevity, I won't pick up anything we've said already. We've talked about limited assurance, we've talked about risk. The two other things I'd like to pick out of the 2 reports, we've had 2 committee meetings. One is cash. So the recommendation from the committee was that the board needed a fuller understanding of cash. We need to make sure that the board understands the cash position. And we also very much wanted to commend and acknowledge the work of the ICB team and all our providers to get to the understanding we currently have about our cash position. Noting that, of course, delivering our plan will resolve our cash position largely. So that needs to be the focus, but equally, of course, we do need to think about what levers we have and how we can mitigate risks to our cash position. So cash is one item. The other item I'd like to pick up is the underlying position. So when we did our operational plan, we knew at that point that our underlying position was not moving quickly enough to improvement. The worry we have now is we have now deteriorated by another 11 million from that planned position. So we have got to focus on our underlying position, otherwise we will find 26, 27 too challenging. So they're the 2 things I wanted to bring up for the committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. So any questions for Kirsty or Kay on the finance report and the finance committee report? Okay, so we are asked to take, on the finance report, we're taking only limited assurance relating to the financial position of the One Devon Integrated Care System and NHS Devon as at month 2. This is clearly going to be a area of focus for the board and for the F&P committee over the next few months. And from the committee chair reports, we're taking assurance, or we're asked to take assurance from the chairs. Reports of the finance committees held on the 12th of July and 12th of June and the 10th of July. Are we happy to take assurance? And we're asked to note the escalation in respect of the limited assurance overall on the financial position of the integrated care system at month 2 of the financial year. And we're asked to note that the committee has discussed the Devon system cash risk policy and the need for the NHS Devon board to understand and be aware of it in the light of the risks around cash. Is the board happy with those recommendations? Okay, thank you. In the next 14 minutes, we're going to take the other committee chair reports. So at 6.1, back to Kay for the Remuneration Committee of the 16th of June 2025.
Thank you, Chair. So apologies, I need to get my papers up, which isn't helpful for your time. Could we do the...
Let's do the Audit and Risk Committee first, then we'll come back to the Remuneration Committee.
So we met on the 19th of June. It was the end of the review process of the annual report accounts, and as many people here know, That committee made a recommendation for its approval. I went to the board and it was approved. So that was submitted. Actually, DHSC has now got a first cut of the whole consolidation. There's 52 entities in it, of which NHS England is only one. So it was a great job to get it in on a timely basis. Just a couple of highlights, just to repeat for those, apologies, but I think it's worth noting it in a public board, that the opinion from KPMG was good, a clean opinion. Value for money, the only thing they did raise, which is not the first time, is a recognition that our SIP delivery was a different profile than we had anticipated, and thus one could question the challenge of financial sustainability in this financial year. But they recognise that as a public body, it's very rare to not be a going concern. We were pleased to see that the internal audit opinion came out as satisfactory, which is an improvement on the limited opinion that we'd previously received. So all in all, a very good position to be in. Two things, perhaps three things going forward. One is that the responsibilities for financial reporting on climate change, environmental impact will be going up. So they noted that we hadn't really addressed that in this cycle. We will need to in the next. The other point that we raised was that there's some really interesting data on health inequalities, which we don't believe is seen by committees, and yet it's in the annual report and account, and so we recommended that is taken to, at the very least, a committee, if not the committee and the board, in due course. And my third point is we did a really great job this year. Big congratulations to all involved. Next year's timeline is likely to be tighter still, as they're trying to move the reporting date to pre-summer recess at some point. So I'll take questions.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions for Graham? I'd just like to give my thanks to everyone involved in getting to the satisfactory opinion, the satisfactory audit opinion, which is a big achievement over the past 12 months. So thank you, Graham, because I know the audit committee has given a particular oversight on that, and thank you also to the governance team for the work that they've done to help get us there. And just to note that we will be bringing the annual report and accounts to the next public meeting of the ICB board. So we're asked to take assurance from the committee chair's report of the meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee held on the 19th of June. Are we happy to take assurance? Thank you. And we're asked to note the recommendation to the Population and Health Committee that it reviews the health inequalities statement contained within Appendix 2 of NHS Devon's annual report for the 24-25 financial year. And we'll ask the committee chair for Population Health, LOPA, to take that forward. Okay, thank you very much. Kay, shall we go back to Remuneration Committee?
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks, Graham. So it was a really helpful committee meeting. We discussed the remuneration and staff report that was as part of the annual report. That we had some really helpful conversations. The outcome of which was that the committee was able to recommend the remuneration staff report to go into the annual accounts and annual report. So I think it was the first time the committee had done that piece of work, and I think it did add quite a bit of value. So thank you to committee members for that conversation.
Thanks, Kay. Any questions for Kay on her committee report? If not, we're asked to take assurance from the committee chair's report of the meeting of the Remuneration Committee held on the 16th of June 2025. Is the board happy to take that assurance? Thank you. We move on now to the People and Organisational Development Committee of the 23rd of June 2025, and the Chair's report is at item 6.3 of the agenda, and I'll ask Salma to take us into that report.
One of the two items that I wanted to raise has already been covered around the metrics and the move to some SBC control, so that's sorted. Well, not sorted, but that's going to happen. The second one is that there has been a national government decision to defund level 7 apprenticeships that is then going to impact on the development of advanced practice. That alongside an overall reduction in the number of apprentices coming into the service, particularly from the younger group, clearly impact on the future development of the workforce. but it's not a local decision. There's nothing about that we can do to change. So I just wanted to flag it up as an area for your attention, and that was it.
Thank you, Salma. Any questions for Salma on her report from the People and Organisational Development Committee meeting? If not, then we are asked to take assurance from the Committee Chair's report of the meeting of the People and OD Committee held on the 23rd of June 2025. Are we happy to take that assurance? Thank you. And we're asked to note the impact that the government decision to define level 7 apprenticeships will have on advanced practice expansion on clinical and leadership educational programmes. Thank you, Salma. We now move on to the Population Health Improvement Committee and the report from the Chair relating to the meeting of the 9th of July. Lopa.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is a very forward-looking committee, which I think is very helpful. But given the current clustering status that we're in, some of the issues around population health data and how that is interpreted for this committee will be revisited. So we had to withdraw the population health functional mapping tool, for example, for this meeting. We were very fortunate. We did do a deep dive on CVD, which I found really informative, and you can see some of that from today's discussion. We also noted the annual report update and offered some insights into that. The 10-year health, 10-year plan engagement findings were presented at this committee, and we noted how valuable an exercise that was, and really commended the team for that piece of work. And then we also had a presentation about the personas, which has also come back, I think, to Development Day, and it's a valuable tool, and we hope that we can see it refined and further tested to help improve our knowledge. That's really what we're talking about, knowledge about how to use population health information to aid our decision making and commissioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Lopa. Are there any questions for Lopa relating to her report from the Population Health Committee? If not, then we're asked to take assurance from the Committee Chair's report of the meeting of the Population Health Improvement Committee held on the 9th of July 2025. Are we happy to take that assurance? Thank you very much. Thank you, Lopa. And the final report is on the One Devon Integrated Care Partnership update, and I will ask Councillor Mary Aspinall, the Chair of the One Devon ICP, to give us that update. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Chair. You'll see from the report here that we held 2 meetings looking at more of a workshop than anything else, and I think that what came out of it was looking at the wider determinants of health needs to be one of those remits that we look at. Obviously, we don't know how long the ICP will be around, so I think it's better for us to concentrate on that than to try and reinvent the wheel. So, but if you've got any questions, but I would like to say thank you to those that attended the workshops. I mean, obviously not brilliant, everybody wasn't there, but I think if we can try and keep going, because I fully appreciate everybody's got a lot of agendas that they need to do outside of this meeting, but it's important that we get that partnership voice. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mary. And I was at the meeting, and it's fair to say that that those who were there, I felt there was a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm for maintaining the work of that committee and until we no longer will. So I thought it was a really, really good meeting. So thanks for chairing that, Mary. Any questions for Mary? So if not, then we note the Chair's report of the workshops of the One Devon Integrated Care Partnership held on the 13th of June and 24th of July 2025. Item 8.1 is questions from a member of the public. I think, Philippa, we covered all of the questions that we received in advance throughout the meeting. Am I right on that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other business for today's meeting? Okay, if not, I would just like to thank everybody for the reports and the presentations today. Some of the there's been some heavy lifting actually during today's meeting, and I want to thank everybody for the contributions that have been made. Also, I just want to thank the support to this board, which comes from Helen Braid and her team. And so really thank you, Helen, and please give the thanks to the team, because I think this there were some last minute changes that we had to do, and all of that I think was managed very, very effectively. So thank you. And I never say thank you to Josh for the technology, but I do want to do that today. So thank you, Josh, for everything that you do for us to enable the live stream to run as smoothly as it does. The date of the next meeting is to be confirmed. I said earlier it's likely to be an extraordinary meeting relating to the clustering of the Devon and Cornwall ICBs. We'll set the date of that as soon as we are able to, and we'll let everybody know about it. So thank you very much. That's the close of the meeting. We can close the live stream, Josh, and